Tonight, there is something you are not supposed to do. You are not supposed to prepare. You are not supposed to plan. You are not supposed to think about tomorrow. And yet, that is exactly what makes this moment dangerous for the mind. Because the human brain was never designed to be idle without a future to protect. It survives by anticipation. It stays alert by imagining what comes next. So if, just for tonight, you remove tomorrow from the equation, the brain doesn't relax. It hesitates, it looks around, and then it starts to behave very differently. Before we go any further, take a moment. If this kind of nighttime recording speaks to you, if you find yourself coming back to these quiet experiments of the mind, go ahead and like this video, share it with someone who also struggles to turn their thoughts off at night, and subscribe to Sleepy Scientist Recordings. These recordings only exist if they're kept, replayed, and returned to. Now, you don't need to do anything else, because tonight has no plan. There is no checklist waiting for you in the morning, no alarm you need to rehearse for, no version of yourself you must be ready to become. Just for this night, there is no tomorrow pressing against your thoughts, and the brain notices immediately. At first, it tries to fill the space. It reaches for habits, unfinished conversations, vague worries, things that might happen. That reflexive scanning is ancient. It's the part of the brain that believes survival depends on readiness. But something feels off. There is no signal demanding action, no timeline to optimize, no decision that improves outcomes. The brain pauses, not because it is calm, but because it is confused. Confusion is the doorway. Without a future to organize around, the mind loses its primary axis. Time begins to soften. Thoughts no longer line up neatly, one after another. They drift instead, overlapping, dissolving before they fully form. This is not relaxation yet. This is the moment control loosens its grip without being asked. You might notice it as a faint disorientation, a sense that you're not late for anything, that nothing is catching up to you. The nervous system listens carefully for danger in moments like this. Normally, no plan would mean risk. But tonight, the body receives a different signal. You're lying down. Your muscles are not preparing to move. Your breath is not pacing itself for effort. The environment is quiet, dim, unthreatening. So the brain begins to downgrade its alert level, not dramatically, not all at once, just enough. Planning requires energy. Anxiety requires rehearsal. When there is no tomorrow to rehearse for, those systems lose their fuel source, and something unexpected takes their place. Awareness becomes wider, but softer. Instead of pointing forward, it spreads outward. You may notice sensations you usually ignore. The weight of your body, the temperature of the air against your skin, the slow rhythm beneath your ribs. These are not tasks. They do not need improvement. They simply exist. This is what the mind does when it is no longer responsible for the future. It stops narrating. Without a tomorrow, the internal voice that explains, evaluates, and predicts begins to quiet, not because it's forced to, but because it has nothing useful to say. There is nothing to prepare you for, no version of later that depends on this moment going correctly. And for a brain that has spent all day managing outcomes, this absence feels strangely safe. Philosophers once described this state as being instead of becoming. But you don't need philosophy to feel it. You feel it when effort drops without collapsing, when you're still awake but no longer bracing. The body understands this long before the mind does. Heart rate subtly slows. Breath deepens without instruction. Muscle tension drains in places you didn't realize were holding, not because you told them to relax, because they were never needed in the first place. This is the intelligence of letting go, not an action, but the removal of a command. When there is no tomorrow, fear loses its timeline. It cannot say what if without a when, so it fades into something less defined, a vague residue rather than a sharp warning. Thoughts still appear, but they arrive without urgency. They do not demand resolution. They pass through like distant weather. You don't have to follow them. And for the first time today, your mind is allowed to exist without obligation. This is not emptiness, it is space. Space where nothing needs to be optimized. Space where doing nothing is not failure. Space where rest is not something you earn. The brain, relieved of its planning role, begins to reorganize itself quietly in the background. Not deliberately, not efficiently, naturally, like a room after everyone has left. You may notice moments where you almost fall asleep, then drift back up. That's normal here. This is the threshold where awareness thins. There is no need to cross it quickly. Tonight is not going anywhere. Without tomorrow, time does not push. So stay here for a moment longer, in this night, with no destination, no improvement to make, no version of yourself waiting on the other side. Just this awareness slowly becoming unnecessary, and as the mind continues to adjust to the absence of plans, it begins to reveal something quieter underneath. A way of existing that does not rely on control at all. And that is where the next part begins. The brain notices the absence before it understands it. There is a brief moment, often overlooked, where nothing is being asked of it, and it doesn't yet know what to do with that freedom. No schedule to maintain, no outcome to optimize. No version of the future waiting to be protected. At first, this feels unnatural. The human brain is a predictive organ. It evolved not to enjoy the present, but to anticipate the next requirement. Even rest during most nights is strategic. Sleep is something the brain uses so it can function better tomorrow. But tonight, that contract has been quietly removed. No one is waiting for performance. No task is improved by rehearsal. No mistake tomorrow can be prevented by worrying now. And the brain hesitates. It keeps scanning for a signal that never arrives. You might feel this as a subtle restlessness, a low-grade itch of attention. Thoughts appear not because they matter, but because the mind is used to filling space with motion. This is not anxiety yet. It's closer to a reflex, like reaching for a light switch in a room you already know is dark. The brain expects resistance. Normally, when it slows down, something pushes back. A reminder, a worry, a sense of responsibility tapping it on the shoulder. But nothing interrupts. So the brain tries again. It offers fragments, unfinished conversations, hypothetical problems, half-formed plans. These are not meaningful. They are probes. The mind testing whether the future is still online. Still nothing. This is where the shift begins. When planning is unnecessary, the systems that support it lose their priority. The brain does not shut them off dramatically. It simply stops allocating energy to them. Like an office that stays open after hours, lights dimmed, no one quite sure who's in charge anymore. Without a goal, attention loses its sharp edges. Instead of aiming forward, it spreads. You may notice this as a widening of awareness. Sounds seem farther away. Sensations feel less labeled. The body becomes something you inhabit, rather than manage. This is unfamiliar territory for a modern mind. Most waking hours are spent in a state of controlled tension. Even comfort is monitored. Even relaxation is evaluated. Is this enough? Am I doing this right? Will this help me later? But without a later, those questions collapse. The brain cannot measure success when there is no metric, and so for the first time in hours, it stops trying. Not completely, just enough to change the texture of thought. Ideas begin to float rather than stack. One doesn't lead cleanly into the next. They overlap, dissolve, reappear in altered forms. Memory and imagination blur, not into dreams yet, but into something softer than logic. This drifting is not random. It is what the brain does when it is not organizing information for use. Normally, your thoughts are arranged like tools on a workbench, placed where they'll be easy to grab later. Tonight, the workbench is empty. The tools are still there, but no longer lined up. They lie scattered, unranked, unprioritized. Nothing needs to be retrieved. And because nothing needs to be retrieved, the brain stops guarding access. This is where control quietly loosens, not as a decision, but as a consequence. Control requires vigilance. It depends on the belief that something bad will happen if attention slips. That belief is tied directly to the future. Remove the future, and control has no leverage. You might feel a slight drop in mental pressure, as if a background hum has lowered by a few degrees. You're still awake, still aware, but the effort behind awareness has thinned. The body responds first. Breathing becomes less patterned, less intentional. You are no longer inhaling for anything. Each breath arrives, completes itself, and leaves without commentary. Muscles follow. Areas that were quietly braced, jaw, shoulders, lower back, begin to release, not because you told them to, but because they were holding for a reason that no longer exists. This is important. True relaxation does not come from instruction. It comes from irrelevance. Muscles let go when they are no longer needed. The brain understands this principle deeply. When there is no plan, tension becomes inefficient. So it starts turning things down, not switching them off, just dimming. The mental voice that explains your experience grows less confident. It speaks more slowly. Sometimes it trails off mid-sentence. Sometimes it forgets to start at all. Silence slips in between thoughts. At first, these gaps may feel noticeable, even uncomfortable. The brain is not used to empty space. It has been trained to fill every pause with productivity or worry. But soon, the gaps lengthen, and something unexpected happens inside them. Safety, not excitement, not happiness, safety. A primitive signal begins to circulate beneath awareness, the kind that says, nothing is required right now. This signal does not come from logic. It comes from the absence of demand. Animals feel it when they stop running. Children feel it before they fall asleep. You feel it when you finally sit down after a long day and realize no one needs anything else from you. The brain trusts this signal more than any reassurance. Because it is embodied, heart rate adjusts subtly, not dramatically enough to notice unless you're listening for it, just enough to align with the slower rhythm of rest. Blood pressure eases. The inner environment becomes less alert, more receptive. You are not relaxing, you are standing down, and standing down feels strange when you're not used to it. Thoughts still appear, but they no longer carry instructions. They arrive as images, fragments, sensations. A memory flashes and dissolves before it finishes. A future scenario starts and then loses interest halfway through. Nothing demands follow-up. The brain is no longer chasing continuity. This is the beginning of mental wandering, the kind that does not seek resolution. It's the state where time stops behaving like a line and starts behaving like a field, wide, unpressured, undefined. You may notice moments of mild disorientation here, a sense of not knowing how long you've been lying still, whether minutes have passed or longer. That's not a loss of awareness. It's a loss of urgency. Time only matters when something depends on it. Tonight, nothing does. So the brain lets go of its tight grip on sequencing. Before and after lose their authority. Everything feels more simultaneous, more present without effort. This is why memories begin to surface. Not important ones, not lessons, just fragments, sensory impressions, old scenes without context. The brain is not retrieving them for meaning. It's releasing them because it can. Memory without purpose becomes texture. You might notice an old room, a sound from childhood, a vague emotional tone with no story attached. These are not invitations to analyze. They are signs that the mind is drifting inward, away from planning, away from control, away from the future. The future is quiet now, and in that quiet, the brain begins to listen to something else. Internal rhythms, patterns that don't lead anywhere, signals that don't need interpretation, background processes that normally stay hidden behind thought. You don't have to pay attention to them. They will continue whether you watch or not. In fact, they work better when unnoticed. This is the paradox of rest. It deepens when you stop trying to experience it. So if you find yourself wondering whether this is working, that wondering will fade too. It always does. Curiosity requires energy. When the brain realizes curiosity has no reward tonight, it gently releases that as well. Nothing is wrong. Nothing is unfinished. You're simply in a moment where the mind has no reason to hold itself together tightly. And as this state continues, without interruption, without demand, the brain begins to shift even further away from the habits of control and towards something older, slower, and far less concerned with outcomes. The silence that follows the disappearance of plans is not empty. It has weight. At first, it presses gently against awareness, like a fog that hasn't decided whether to lift or thicken. The brain senses it immediately, not as peace, but as absence. Something familiar is missing, and the mind reaches for it instinctively. Usually, that missing thing would be direction, a list, a timeline, a next step quietly waiting its turn. But tonight, there's nothing queued up behind the present moment. No invisible line of obligation stretching forward. No mental placeholders saying, remember this later or don't forget tomorrow. So the brain pauses in a way it rarely does. It does not stop. It does not shut down. It simply waits. Waiting without expectation feels strange to a system built on anticipation. The brain has learned over years of repetition that pauses are dangerous. Silence is usually followed by demand. Stillness often precedes interruption, so it listens carefully. You might feel this as heightened awareness at first, a sensitivity to small sounds, a noticing of your own breathing. The mind is alert, but not focused. It's scanning for the thing that normally arrives next. Nothing arrives. This is where the silence deepens. Not dramatically, not all at once. It settles slowly, like dust after movement stops. The mental space between thoughts widens, not because thoughts are forbidden, but because they no longer have momentum. Without a future pulling on them, thoughts lose their urgency. They no longer line up to be processed. They don't demand to be finished. They appear briefly, hover, and then fade, unresolved, unbothered. This can feel unsettling. The modern mind is trained to distrust unfinished things. Loose ends usually signal danger, failure, or incompetence. The brain has been conditioned to close loops as quickly as possible. But tonight, loops are allowed to remain open. Nothing depends on their closure. This permission changes the texture of thinking. Instead of sharp edges, thoughts become rounded. Instead of clear beginnings and endings, they blur into one another. The internal narrative, the story you tell yourself about who you are and what you need to do, begins to thin. Not because you stop thinking, but because the thinking stops pointing anywhere. You might notice moments where you forget what you were just thinking about. That's not distraction, it's release. Memory relies on relevance. The brain remembers what it believes will matter later. When there is no later, memory becomes less sticky. Thoughts don't anchor themselves as easily, they slip. And when they slip, silence takes up more space. This silence is not the absence of sound, it is the absence of instruction. No inner voice telling you what to fix. No internal checklist updating itself. No quiet pressure reminding you to be ready. The mind is still awake here, but it no longer feels supervised. Supervision is exhausting. Most people don't realize how much energy goes into monitoring their own thoughts, redirecting them, correcting them, judging their usefulness. That effort runs constantly in the background. When it stops, even briefly, the relief is subtle but profound. You may feel it as a gentle heaviness in the body. Not sleep yet, just gravity reasserting itself. The sense that you are allowed to sink into the surface beneath you. Muscles begin to respond, not all at once, not symmetrically. Small releases happen first. A jaw unclenches without notice. A shoulder drops a fraction of an inch. Fingers curl more loosely. These changes are not intentional. They are the body's answer to the silence. When the mind stops issuing commands, the body stops preparing. Preparation is tension. Preparation is holding, and holding is no longer required. Breathing follows suit. It loses its rhythm, or rather, it returns to one that doesn't need to be managed. Inhalations lengthen slightly. Exhalations linger. There is no urgency to the cycle. You are not breathing for anything. That distinction matters. Breath used for effort feels different from breath allowed for rest. The nervous system knows the difference instantly. One signals readiness, the other signals safety. Tonight, the signal is clear. Safety does not arrive as a thought. It arrives as a condition, a quiet agreement between mind and body that nothing needs to happen next. This agreement allows awareness to soften. You may notice that your sense of the room becomes less precise. Edges blur. Distances feel less important. The brain no longer needs to map its surroundings accurately when there is no movement planned. Perception turns inward, not in a focused way, but in a diffuse one. Sensations become background rather than foreground. The hum of existence replaces the sharpness of attention. This is the point where many people would normally intervene. They might reach for a phone, turn on noise, engage the mind again to avoid the discomfort of quiet. But if you stay here, if you allow the silence to remain unfilled, something else begins to happen. The brain stops narrating the silence. At first, the mind may comment on it. It's quiet. I should be asleep by now. This feels strange. These thoughts are automatic, like habits completing themselves, but without reinforcement, they fade. The narrator loses interest. Without a story to tell about the future, the internal voice becomes less confident. It speaks more slowly. Sometimes it pauses mid-thought, as if forgetting why it started. Eventually, it goes quiet, not forcefully, but naturally. And in that quiet, a different layer of experience emerges, one that doesn't rely on words. This layer is subtle. It's easy to miss because it doesn't announce itself. It has no opinions, no commentary, just presence. You feel it as a continuous sense of being here, without explanation. The mind usually sits on top of this layer, interpreting it, framing it, turning it into meaning. Tonight, with no meaning required, the mind steps aside. Presence doesn't need improvement. It doesn't need context. It doesn't need to be understood. It simply continues. This is why time begins to feel strange here. Minutes lose their shape. The sense of duration stretches or compresses unpredictably. You might feel like you've been here a long time or no time at all. That's because timekeeping depends on change. When nothing is changing in a way that matters, time loses its grip. The brain stops counting. And when the brain stops counting, fatigue deepens, not as exhaustion, but as surrender. This is not the tiredness of depletion. It's the tiredness of no longer resisting. Resistance is effort. Without a future to push against, resistance fades. You may notice small flickers of imagery now, not full dreams, just impressions, shapes, colors, a sense of movement without location. These are not messages. They are signals that the boundary between waking and sleeping is thinning. The brain is beginning to decouple awareness from control. Normally, awareness is tied to responsibility. Being awake means being available. Being conscious means being in charge. Tonight, awareness is allowed to drift without command. You're conscious, but not directing. This state is fragile, not because it's weak, but because it's unfamiliar. The mind may try once or twice more to reassert itself. A sudden thought, a question, a brief return of planning. That's okay. Those attempts are gentle now, half-hearted. They don't last. Because each time the brain reaches forward and finds nothing waiting, it learns something new. It learns that nothing bad happens when it lets go. That learning accumulates quietly, and as it does, the silence that once felt uncertain begins to feel neutral, then comfortable, then inviting. The brain begins to trust the absence. Trust is what allows deeper rest. Not instruction, not technique, not effort. Trust. And trust grows best in conditions where nothing is demanded. So stay here, in this silence that doesn't ask anything of you. In this moment where thoughts are optional. In this night where the future has loosened its hold. Because as the silence continues to deepen, the mind will begin to slip even further away from the structures it uses during the day and toward a mode of being that requires no supervision at all. There is a quiet distinction the brain makes when no one is watching. It does not announce it. It does not label it. But it changes everything about how you experience this night. The distinction is simple, yet profound. Am I surviving, or am I just existing? Most of your waking life is lived in survival mode, even when nothing appears threatening. Survival does not always mean danger. Often, it means readiness. It means staying prepared for what might be required next. The brain is very good at this. It learned long ago that staying alive depended on anticipating hunger, cold, conflict, movement. Even now, in a world filled with comfort and artificial light, that ancient system still runs quietly underneath everything you do. It asks questions constantly. What's coming next? What could go wrong? What should I be ready for? These questions don't always feel urgent. Sometimes they hide behind productivity, responsibility, even ambition. But they all point in the same direction, forward. Survival looks forward. Existence does not. Tonight, something unusual is happening. There is nothing to prepare for, and without preparation, survival mode loses its anchor. At first, the brain doesn't know this consciously. It doesn't say, "Oh, I can stop now." Instead, it notices something more subtle, a lack of tension. Normally, there is a faint pressure running through awareness, a sense that attention should be pointed, that time should be used, that energy should be conserved for something important. That pressure is missing, and the brain reacts cautiously. It doesn't switch modes immediately. It tests the environment first. It waits to see if the demand will return. It holds on to readiness just in case. This is why even now you may still feel slightly alert, slightly present, slightly aware of being awake. That's survival checking in. But as moments pass without instruction, without interruption, without consequence, the brain begins to understand something deeper. There is no threat in stillness tonight, no cost to slowing down, no punishment for drifting, no disadvantage to letting go. This realization doesn't arrive as a thought. It arrives as a shift. You may feel it as a subtle drop in mental posture, as if you were standing at attention all day and have finally been allowed to sit, not abruptly, but gradually, with relief spreading through your body. The shoulders settle, the face softens, the space behind the eyes feels less tight. These are not emotional changes, they are structural ones. The nervous system is reclassifying your state from engaged to safe enough to rest. This is the moment survival mode begins to loosen, not disappear, just step back. And when it does, another mode quietly takes its place, existence. Existence does not scan, it does not plan, it does not evaluate outcomes. Existence simply allows. When the brain enters this mode, awareness changes quality. It becomes less directional, less sharp, less invested in what happens next. You may notice that your thoughts no longer feel like tools. They feel more like weather, passing through rather than assembling into plans. This is not a failure of focus. It is a release from necessity. The brain is discovering that, for now, nothing depends on it. That discovery is rare. During the day, even moments of rest are conditional. There is always an unspoken after this break, after this nap, after this pause. Tonight, there is no after pressing against the present, so the brain stops leaning forward. When it stops leaning forward, balance changes. You may feel heavier, not tired, but grounded. Gravity feels more noticeable. The surface beneath you feels more supportive, as if it has been there all along, waiting for you to notice. This is existence reclaiming space. In survival mode, the body is treated like a vehicle, something to operate, something to keep functional. In existence mode, the body is no longer a tool. It is a place you inhabit rather than manage. Breathing reflects this immediately. It stops being measured, stops being adjusted, stops being subtly controlled. Each breath arrives because it must, not because it should. The exhale lengthens, not as a technique, but as a consequence of no longer needing to stay alert. This is important. Survival mode keeps the exhale short. It prepares the body for movement, for response. Existence mode allows the exhale to complete itself. And when exhalation deepens, the nervous system receives a clear signal. There is time enough to let go, time enough to drift, time enough to not be needed. Heart rate follows. It doesn't drop suddenly, it settles, like a conversation ending naturally without anyone forcing the silence. The brain notices this internal coherence, the way breath, heart, and muscle tone are beginning to agree with each other. Agreement is calming. When internal systems stop arguing about what needs to happen next, energy stops leaking away. This is why you may feel a quiet fullness now. Not excitement, not pleasure, just enoughness. Existence is not stimulating. It is sufficient. In this state, identity loosens. Not dramatically. You don't forget who you are. You simply stop rehearsing it. The roles you carry, worker, planner, caretaker, thinker, lose relevance when there is nothing to do and no one to become. They don't vanish, they just wait. And without those roles constantly being refreshed, the sense of self becomes simpler, more basic. You're no longer someone trying to arrive somewhere, you're just here. This simplicity can feel unfamiliar. The mind is used to complexity, used to layering intention on top of sensation, used to narrating every moment. But existence doesn't require narration. It continues whether or not it is described. So the inner commentary begins to thin, not because it is silenced, but because it runs out of material. There is nothing to judge, nothing to improve, nothing to optimize. The brain, relieved of its managerial duties, begins to observe without interference. This observation is passive, almost curious, but without urgency. You might notice small details now, the way the air feels cooler at the edges of your breath, the faint pulsing sensation beneath your skin, the subtle hum of awareness itself. These sensations were always present. You just didn't need them before. In survival mode, the brain filters out anything that doesn't serve action. In existence mode, the filter relaxes. Everything is allowed to be felt because nothing needs to be acted upon. This is why emotions soften here, not disappear. Soften. Even difficult feelings lose their sharpness when they are no longer part of a story about the future. Sadness without a timeline feels different from sadness with a tomorrow attached. Without tomorrow, emotion becomes sensation rather than problem. It passes more easily. The brain understands this intuitively. That's why it stays here once it arrives. Existence mode is efficient. It uses less energy. It creates less noise. It allows deeper restoration. This is the state the brain has been moving toward all night, not sleep yet, but the doorway to it. You may feel moments where awareness dips, where thoughts dissolve into nothing for a second or two before returning. These are not interruptions. They are previews. The brain is testing how far it can let go without losing safety. Each time it dips and nothing bad happens, trust grows. Trust is the currency of sleep, not force, not exhaustion. Trust. And trust can only form when survival is no longer in charge. So remain here, in this quieter mode of being, in this place where nothing is demanded of you, in this night where existence is enough. Because as survival continues to step back, the brain will begin to do something it only does when it feels completely unobserved. It will allow memories to rise without purpose, without context, without explanation, and that is where the next movement begins. When the brain is no longer tasked with protecting the future, it turns inward, not deliberately, not nostalgically, but instinctively. Memory begins to surface, not because it is needed, but because nothing is stopping it. During the day, memory is tightly regulated. The brain retrieves what will be useful, what will inform decisions, what will help predict outcomes. Everything else is kept sealed away, archived, ignored. There is no time for wandering, but tonight, time has loosened its grip. With no tomorrow to prepare for, memory loses its hierarchy. Important and unimportant blur together. The filing system collapses quietly, and fragments begin to float up on their own. You might notice this already. A place you haven't thought about in years. A face without a name. A feeling without a story. These memories do not arrive with explanations. They do not announce why they are here. They do not ask to be understood. They simply appear. This is not reflection. Reflection has purpose. It looks back in order to learn something for later. Tonight, there is no later. So what surfaces is different. It is memory without agenda. The brain, relieved of its planning duties, opens doors that are usually kept closed, not because they are dangerous, but because they are inefficient. There is no benefit to revisiting half-formed experiences during the day. At night, benefit no longer matters. The memories that rise now are often sensory rather than narrative. You may notice textures before events, light before meaning, a sound before context. This is because memory, at its core, is not a story. It is a sensation preserved in time. The stories were added later to make sense of it all. Tonight, the stories are optional. So memory returns to its original form, raw, incomplete, unstructured. You might feel an emotion without knowing where it came from. A warmth, a heaviness, a vague sense of familiarity. These are not problems to solve. They are signals that the mind is drifting deeper into itself. When the future is silent, the past becomes louder, not to dominate, but to equalize. The brain is not pulling you backward. It is redistributing attention. Normally, attention leans forward. Even when you remember something during the day, it is framed by what it means for who you are now, or what you should do next. Tonight, attention has nowhere to lean, so it spreads evenly. Past, present, and sensation coexist without hierarchy. This is why memories feel different now. They are less sharp but more immersive, less analytical but more atmospheric. You are not remembering about something, you are briefly inside it. This can feel strangely intimate. You might notice your body responding before your mind does. A subtle tightening in the chest, a softening in the face, a shift in breathing. The body remembers things the mind has forgotten, not as facts, but as states. And because there is no need to protect yourself tonight, those states are allowed to pass through without resistance. This is important. Resistance is what turns memory into pain. When the brain believes something needs to be fixed, avoided, or learned from, it tightens around the experience. It holds it too firmly. Tonight, there is no reason to hold, so memory becomes lighter. Even difficult memories lose their sharp edges when they are not being evaluated. Without a future to influence, they stop being warnings. They become weather. They pass. You may notice that memories appear out of order. a childhood image followed by something recent, a meaningless moment followed by something that once felt important. This randomness is not chaos, it is freedom from sorting. The brain is no longer asking, "Why does this matter?" It is simply allowing what arises to arise. This is a rare state. Most people never experience memory this way while awake. The day demands too much structure. Even dreams often carry emotional momentum, narratives, themes. This is different. This is memory without narrative gravity. Fragments float up, hover briefly, then dissolve back into the background without consequence. Nothing follows. And because nothing follows, the mind does not chase. Chasing is exhausting. Tonight, there is no chase. The internal space grows quieter, not because memory stops, but because it stops pulling attention forward or backward. It just exists. You may feel moments of stillness between memories now, gaps where nothing appears at all. These gaps are longer than before, more comfortable. They are not empty. They are resting points. The brain is learning that it can let go completely, even of content, without losing safety. That learning is subtle, but cumulative. Each time a memory passes without causing tension, the nervous system updates its understanding of the night. It learns, "I can allow this." Allowing is the opposite of control. Control narrows attention. Allowing widens it. As attention widens, effort decreases. This is why your body may feel heavier now, not weighed down, but settled, as if gravity has become an ally rather than a force to resist. Muscles continue to soften in small increments. The jaw rests more fully. The tongue lies flat. The space behind the eyes feels deeper, less compressed. These are signs that the brain is no longer preparing for response. Response requires readiness. Readiness requires tension. Tonight, readiness is unnecessary. Memory continues to drift, but more slowly now. The intervals between fragments stretch. The fragments themselves feel fainter, less detailed. This is not forgetting. It is deprioritizing. The brain is turning its attention away from content and toward process. It begins to focus, quietly, unconsciously, on internal maintenance. When the mind stops managing meaning, it frees resources for restoration. This is where deeper systems begin to take over. You may feel subtle shifts you can't quite name, a sense of sinking, a gentle pulling inward, a loss of sharp boundaries between your body and the space around it. This is the brain decoupling awareness from control. Normally, awareness is used to monitor and direct. Tonight, awareness is becoming observational only. You are still here, but you are no longer steering. This can feel like drifting or floating or falling very slowly without fear. Fear requires anticipation. Anticipation requires a future. Without a future, fear has no foothold. So the drift continues. Memory becomes less frequent now. When it appears, it is softer, more impressionistic. A color, a sensation, a hint of familiarity without form. Soon, even these impressions begin to blur. The brain is transitioning, not into unconsciousness yet, but into a state where thought is no longer necessary. This is the edge, the place where wakefulness thins and something deeper waits beneath it. You do not need to cross it intentionally. In fact, intention would only delay it. The brain knows how to do this. It has done it thousands of times before. It only needed the future to step aside. And now that it has, the mind is free to sink further into a mode where nothing is remembered, nothing is planned. and nothing is required to be held together, where even memory begins to fade into a softer, quieter awareness. And that is where the next movement gently carries you. There comes a moment when the mind realizes it no longer has to hold itself together. It doesn't announce this moment. It doesn't mark it with clarity. It simply loosens. Up until now, even as memory drifted and thought softened, there was still a faint sense of effort beneath everything, a quiet holding, a subtle grip that said, "Stay aware, just in case." That grip is ancient. It is the same grip that keeps an animal half awake while resting, the same vigilance that allows a body to relax without becoming vulnerable. For most of human history, letting go completely was dangerous, so the brain learned a compromise. It learned how to rest while still listening. Tonight, however, the listening is becoming unnecessary. Nothing has interrupted you. Nothing has demanded response. Nothing has proven itself worth preparing for. And slowly, the brain begins to update its assumptions. The update is not intellectual, it is physiological. The nervous system shifts its balance away from readiness and toward maintenance, away from scanning and toward regulation. This is not sleep yet. This is the handoff. Control does not disappear. It steps aside. You may feel this as a change in the effort of awareness. Not the clarity, just the effort. It takes less energy to be here now, less tension to remain conscious. Thoughts, when they appear, feel farther away, as if they are happening on the other side of a thin wall. You can still hear them, but they no longer feel central. This distance is important. It means the brain is no longer identifying with every thought that passes through. Thoughts are becoming events rather than instructions. That distinction is subtle but powerful. Most anxiety comes not from thoughts themselves, but from the belief that thoughts require action. When that belief dissolves, thoughts lose their authority. Tonight, authority is unnecessary. So the mind relaxes its grip on interpretation. You may notice that when a thought arises now, it doesn't fully form. It begins, then fades, or it appears complete, but feels irrelevant almost immediately. This is not distraction. It is disengagement. The brain is practicing a new relationship with awareness, one where awareness does not have to manage content. Management is tiring. It requires constant evaluation, constant comparison, constant correction. Without management, awareness becomes passive. Passive awareness feels spacious. You may notice the space first as silence, but it is more than that. It is a sense of room inside the mind, as if internal walls have moved farther apart. This spaciousness allows sensations to arrive without friction. The feeling of the surface beneath you becomes more diffuse, less localized. The boundary between where your body ends and the environment begins feels softer. You are not dissolving, you are integrating. When the brain is no longer focused on control, it begins to synchronize its systems. Breath, heart, muscle tone, and awareness start moving at compatible speeds. This synchronization is deeply calming. During the day, these systems often work against each other. The mind wants one thing, the body wants another. The breath is caught in between. Tonight, with no directive pulling them apart, they align naturally. Breath deepens further, not dramatically, not in waves, just enough that the pauses between breaths feel more noticeable. Those pauses are not empty, they are resting points. The nervous system uses them to recalibrate. Each pause tells the body, there is time, time to repair, time to release, time to let go. This message travels quickly through the body, through nerve pathways older than language, through mechanisms that do not care about thought. You may feel a gentle warmth spreading, not heat, but circulation, as if blood flow is redistributing itself more evenly, less rushed, less constrained. This is the body exiting performance mode. Performance mode is expensive, it burns energy quickly, it keeps systems slightly overactive just in case. Maintenance mode is different. Maintenance is slow, quiet, efficient. The brain prefers it, but rarely gets permission to enter it while awake. Tonight, permission has been granted by absence. No plan, no tomorrow, no reason to stay sharp. So, maintenance begins. You might notice tiny adjustments happening without your involvement. A swallow, a deeper sigh, a shift in posture so slight it almost escapes notice. These are not fidgets, they are corrections. The body is aligning itself with gravity, with support, with rest. And as the body settles, awareness follows. The sense of I am here becomes less defined, not gone, just less sharp. Identity feels less like a solid object and more like a field. This is often the point where people feel as if they are drifting. Drifting is not falling. Falling implies loss of control. Drifting implies no need for it. The brain is allowing itself to be carried by internal rhythms rather than steering them. This is why time feels even stranger now. Moments stretch, or compress, or disappear entirely. You may lose track of where one thought ended and another began. You may not even remember whether you were thinking at all a moment ago. This is not confusion. This is the mind loosening its grip on continuity. Continuity is a cognitive effort. It's how the brain maintains a sense of narrative, of self moving through time. Narrative requires structure. Tonight, structure is optional, so the narrative thins. Instead of a story, there is a flow, a sense of being carried from one internal state to the next without commentary. This flow is soothing. It reduces the burden of self-monitoring. The constant question of, am I doing this right? Quietly disappears. You may notice now that you're no longer checking in with yourself as often, no longer asking how relaxed you are, how sleepy you feel, how long this is taking. Those questions require a goal. Without a goal, they fade. The mind is learning that it does not have to supervise its own descent into rest. This learning is delicate. The brain tests it gently, allowing awareness to dip for a few seconds, then return, then dip again a little longer. Each time awareness returns and finds nothing wrong, trust deepens. Trust is cumulative. It builds slowly through repetition without consequence. And as trust builds, the dips become deeper. You may feel moments where you are almost gone, where awareness thins to a thread, then gently reappears. This is not interruption, it is rehearsal. The brain is practicing letting go completely while knowing it can come back if needed. Soon it realizes it doesn't need to come back at all. But it won't rush that realization. The brain is patient. It has waited all day for this moment. You may notice that sounds in your environment feel farther away now, less intrusive, as if they are happening in another room. This is because the brain is reducing sensory prioritization. It no longer needs detailed input when there is no action planned. Sensation becomes ambient rather than focal. The world recedes slightly, not disappearing, just stepping back. This creates a cocoon-like quality around awareness. Inside this cocoon, the mind is safe to dissolve further. You might feel a sense of sinking now, or floating, or neither, just a gentle loss of edges. These sensations are not signs of something happening to you. They are signs of something happening for you. The brain is transitioning control from conscious systems to deeper, automatic ones. These deeper systems do not think. They regulate, they do not analyze, they restore. This is the threshold where rest becomes inevitable, not forced, not chased, not earned, just allowed. If thoughts still appear, they are faint now, more like echoes than statements. They drift through without pulling you with them. Soon, even the awareness of drifting becomes unnecessary. The mind does not need to watch itself fall asleep. It has done this before, many times. It only forgot how effortless it could be. Tonight, with no tomorrow waiting, the brain remembers. And as it continues to let go of the last threads of control, last habits of monitoring, last impulses to hold itself upright, it prepares to cross into a state where awareness no longer needs to be maintained at all, where nothing is required to be present, where even drifting gives way to something deeper, slower, and completely unobserved. And that is where the next movement quietly begins. There is a moment when breathing changes before you notice it, not because you decided to breathe differently, not because you were told to slow down, but because there is no longer any reason to hurry. Breath is one of the first systems to respond when the future releases its grip. During the day, breathing is rarely neutral. It is subtly shaped by expectation, by movement that might be needed, by speech that could be required, by stress that keeps the body prepared to act. Even when you think you are resting, breath often carries a quiet tension. It stays shallow enough to respond quickly, controlled enough to avoid vulnerability. That control is automatic, it is learned, and it is no longer necessary tonight. As survival mode continues to step back, the brain sends a signal it rarely sends while awake. There is time, not time until something happens, just time. This signal reaches the breath before it reaches conscious thought. You may notice the inhale no longer pulls upward sharply. It expands outward instead, into the ribs, the back, the lower spaces of the chest that are usually ignored. The exhale follows more slowly. It doesn't rush to end. It doesn't cut itself short to make room for the next breath. It completes itself. Completion is rare during the day. Most things are interrupted, paused, deferred. Breath is no exception. But tonight, breath is allowed to finish. And when the exhale finishes fully, something subtle happens inside the nervous system. The body receives confirmation. Nothing is chasing you. That confirmation is powerful. It tells the brain that vigilance is unnecessary, that alertness can continue to soften, that deeper systems are allowed to come online. You might notice that the pauses between breaths feel longer now, not empty, suspended. These pauses are not gaps that need to be filled. They are moments where the body is neither inhaling nor exhaling, and nothing bad happens. For a nervous system used to constant motion, this is a revelation. Stillness does not equal danger. The brain learns this not through logic, but through experience. Each pause teaches it something new. You may also notice that breath no longer feels centered in the chest. It becomes whole body, subtle movement in the abdomen, gentle expansion through the sides. A sense that breathing is happening with you rather than by you. This shift marks a deeper transition. Breathing has moved from effort to rhythm. Rhythm does not require supervision. Once rhythm takes over, the mind can step even further back. This is why thinking feels less dense now, less sticky. Thoughts still appear, but they don't cling. They don't hook into the breath. They don't disrupt the rhythm. The breath becomes a background current, steady, quiet, reliable. And because breath is one of the strongest signals of safety the body knows, everything else begins to follow. Heart rate aligns more fully with the slower pace, not slowing dramatically, just settling into a range that doesn't expect action. Muscle tone adjusts again. Small areas you didn't realize were still holding finally release. The neck, the space around the eyes, the lower back. These releases happen without permission. They are responses, not decisions. The body is listening to the breath, and the breath is saying, "We are not going anywhere." This message allows awareness to sink further inward. You may notice that your sense of effort has dropped significantly now. Being awake no longer feels like something you are doing. You are simply present. This is different from alertness. Alertness scans. It prepares. It anticipates. Presence rests. Presence does not lean forward or backward. It does not wait for the next moment. It does not evaluate the current one. It simply exists within it. The brain rarely allows itself to remain in pure presence while awake. The day demands too much interpretation. Tonight, interpretation is optional. So, the mind releases it. You might notice that sounds fade further into the distance, not because they disappear, but because they no longer need to be processed. The brain reduces their priority. It categorizes them as non-threatening, non-actionable. They become part of the environment rather than signals. This reduction in sensory processing frees even more energy. Energy that the brain quietly redirects toward restoration. You may feel this as a sense of sinking deeper into your body, or a feeling of being gently pulled downward, not physically, but perceptually. Your awareness feels heavier, but also softer. This combination is a hallmark of deepening rest. Heaviness without strain, softness without collapse. The mind begins to lose interest in staying fully formed. Identity loosens further. You may no longer feel strongly identified with your thoughts, your name, your history. These concepts are still accessible, but they feel distant, like items on a shelf you don't need to reach for. The present moment becomes more dominant, not because it is vivid, but because it is sufficient. Breath continues its slow rhythm, carrying you without effort. Each cycle deepens the sense of safety. Each pause reinforces the message. Nothing needs to happen. This is where anxiety truly dissolves, not because it is fought, but because it has no context to survive in. Anxiety needs a future. It needs a possibility to rehearse. Without tomorrow, it becomes unanchored. What remains is a faint residue of sensation, energy without direction. That energy dissipates naturally when it is not fed by thought. So you may notice that even lingering tension begins to melt now. Not in waves, not dramatically. It simply thins, like mist warming in the sun. You might drift in and out of awareness at this point. Brief moments where the mind goes completely quiet, then gently returns. These moments may feel disjointed or even unnoticed. That's okay. They are signs that the brain is no longer insisting on continuous awareness. Continuity is another form of control, and control is no longer necessary. The breath continues regardless of whether you notice it. The heart continues regardless of whether you monitor it. The body continues regardless of whether you direct it. This realization allows the mind to let go even further. You may feel now as if you are being carried by something steady and internal, like a slow tide moving beneath the surface of thought. You don't need to follow it. You don't need to resist it. It will move whether you attend to it or not. This is the point where many people fall asleep without realizing it. But even if you remain aware, awareness has changed. It is thinner, more transparent. It does not demand participation. The brain is preparing for a deeper descent, one where consciousness itself becomes optional. Breath is the bridge. As long as breath remains slow and complete, the nervous system stays in agreement with rest. And as that agreement holds, the brain becomes comfortable releasing even the last subtle habits of wakefulness. Soon, even the awareness of breathing will fade into the background, not because it stops, but because attention no longer needs to stay with it. When that happens, the mind will be free to move beyond rhythm, beyond sensation, beyond presence itself, into a state where nothing is tracked, nothing is observed, and nothing needs to be remembered. And that is where the next movement quietly begins. Anxiety does not disappear when the future goes quiet. It simply loses its name. Most people imagine anxiety as a loud presence, racing thoughts, tight breath, restless movement. But that is only what anxiety looks like when it is being actively used. Anxiety's true function is simpler. It prepares. It scans for what might happen next and keeps the body slightly ahead of the moment. As long as there is a tomorrow, anxiety has work to do. Tonight, that work has been quietly suspended. And without work, anxiety does not vanish. It dissolves. You may still feel traces of it, not as fear, not as worry, but as vague sensation, a low hum of energy in the chest, a faint alertness behind the eyes, a subtle readiness without direction. This is anxiety without language. Normally, anxiety survives by being named. What if this goes wrong? What about tomorrow? I should be more prepared. These phrases give anxiety structure. They give it edges. They allow it to organize itself into something actionable. But when tomorrow is removed, anxiety cannot complete its sentences. It starts to speak and then stops. You might notice this now. A thought begins to form, but it doesn't know where to go. A feeling arises, but it has no story to attach itself to. A sense of urgency flickers, then fades without explanation. This is not suppression. Nothing is being pushed away. Anxiety is simply not being fed. Without a future to point toward, it has nowhere to anchor. So it becomes diffuse, and diffusion is calming. The nervous system does not respond strongly to unnamed signals. It reacts to clear threats, clear timelines, clear instructions. Vagueness does not mobilize the body. So the body begins to stand down. You may feel this as a softening of internal tension rather than a dramatic release, as if something that was once tight has become porous. The chest feels less compressed, the stomach less braced, the muscles less prepared, not relaxed, just unneeded. This distinction matters. Relaxation can still carry effort. It can feel like something you are doing to yourself. This is different. This is what happens when the reason for tension quietly disappears. Anxiety fades best when it is ignored, not deliberately, but incidentally. Tonight, you're not trying to calm yourself. You're simply not giving anxiety anything to do. Without rehearsal, it loses momentum. Without momentum, it loses shape. And without shape, it stops commanding attention. You may notice now that your internal space feels quieter, but not empty. There is still sensation, still awareness, still presence. But nothing is sharp. Sharpness belongs to urgency. Urgency belongs to the future. With the future absent, everything rounds off. Thoughts are softer, sensations are slower, awareness is wider. This widening is protective. A narrow mind fixates, a wide mind absorbs. The brain naturally shifts toward widening when threat is low. You might feel this as a subtle expansion of perception. Less focus on any one thing, more sense of being surrounded by experience rather than pointed at it. In this state, anxiety has no leverage. It cannot isolate a problem when nothing stands out strongly enough to be labeled one. So it remains as background energy only, and background energy is harmless. You may even feel moments of mild discomfort now, not because something is wrong, but because the mind is unused to this unstructured quiet. The brain is accustomed to naming sensations quickly. This is stress. This is fatigue. This is worry. Naming creates control. But tonight, names feel unnecessary. Sensations are allowed to be what they are without translation. This can feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable for a moment. But the nervous system adapts quickly when it realizes there is no penalty for not understanding. Understanding is a tool, and tools are put down when they are not needed. As anxiety continues to lose its narrative, another process begins quietly underneath. The brain starts to reinterpret internal signals. Normally, a flutter in the chest might be labeled as nervousness. A heaviness in the body might be labeled as exhaustion or dread. Tonight, without labels, these same sensations are reclassified. The flutter becomes energy without meaning. The heaviness becomes gravity without threat. This reclassification changes everything. The same sensations, interpreted differently, produce completely different experiences. This is why anxiety can fade without being addressed. It was never the sensation itself that caused distress. It was the story attached to it. Remove the story, and the sensation becomes neutral or even soothing. You may notice now that sensations that once felt uncomfortable are simply there. They do not push you to act. They do not pull your attention forcefully. They exist, and then they change. Change without urgency feels gentle. The brain begins to trust this process. Trust is not something you decide. It is something your nervous system accumulates through evidence. Each moment that passes without consequence builds that evidence. Nothing bad happens when anxiety is not named. Nothing collapses when thoughts are not resolved. Nothing is lost when awareness drifts. The brain records this quietly, and as it records it, vigilance decreases further. You may feel now that the boundary between wakefulness and sleep is becoming less distinct, not because you're tired, but because nothing is holding you firmly on the waking side. Anxiety often acts as that anchor. It keeps the mind tethered to alertness. Without it, the tether loosens. You might feel moments of lightness now, or sinking, or a sensation of being gently pulled inward. These are not signs of sleep arriving, they are signs of resistance leaving. Sleep does not arrive forcefully. It emerges when there is nothing left opposing it. Anxiety is one of the last things to oppose it. And tonight, anxiety has quietly stepped aside. Not defeated, not silenced, just unneeded. The brain recognizes this and begins to reorganize its priorities. Attention turns inward even more, towards slower rhythms, toward deeper cycles. You may notice that your thoughts have become sparse now, not completely gone, but spaced far apart. When they do appear, they feel thin, like whispers rather than statements. This thinning is important. Thick thoughts require energy. They demand focus, reaction, evaluation. Thin thoughts pass easily. They do not attach. You are not doing this. The brain is doing it for you, because it finally can. As anxiety dissolves into unnamed sensation, the mind no longer feels watched from the inside. There is no internal pressure to stay alert. The sense of being observed by yourself fades. This is a deep form of safety. Many people don't realize how exhausting self-observation is. Constantly checking how you feel, how you're doing, whether you should be feeling differently. Tonight, that observer is tired, and it is allowed to rest. Without the observer, experience becomes simpler. You're no longer having sensations. You're just within them. This shift reduces effort even further. The body continues its descent into rest. The breath remains slow and complete. The heart steady. Muscles settle into their final positions, no longer adjusting. The nervous system has accepted the night fully. You may feel now that awareness itself is beginning to thin, not flickering, but fading at the edges. This is not losing consciousness, it is releasing the need to hold onto it. The brain is comfortable letting awareness come and go. Nothing depends on its continuity. That realization is profound, and as it settles in, the last remnants of anxiety, those faint, unnamed energies, lose their influence entirely. They blend into the background of sensation. They stop signaling anything at all. What remains is a quiet, neutral field of experience. No urgency, no preparation, no demand, just being. This is the condition in which sleep becomes inevitable, not as an event but as a transition. The brain has removed every obstacle. The future is silent. Control is absent. Anxiety has no language. Only rest remains as a possibility. And as the mind continues to drift within this unnamed quiet, without labeling, without preparing, without holding itself together, it begins to cross into a state where awareness no longer needs to be maintained, where even the sense of being aware grows faint, and where the body and brain are free to enter the deeper rhythms they have been moving toward all night. And that is where the next movement slowly unfolds. There is a precise moment when the brain stops trying to solve anything at all. It doesn't happen suddenly. It doesn't feel dramatic. Most people never notice it, but it changes the entire quality of the night. Up until now, even as anxiety dissolved and control loosened, the brain was still holding on to one last habit, the habit of problem solving. Not active problem solving, not deliberate thinking, but the readiness to solve. That readiness is subtle. It's the sense that if something were to appear, a thought, a memory, a feeling, it would need to be handled, interpreted, managed, placed somewhere sensible. That habit has been running quietly in the background your entire life. During the day, it keeps you functional. At night, it often keeps you awake. Tonight, it begins to fade. You may notice this as a gentle indifference toward your own thoughts. A thought appears, and instead of engaging with it, the mind simply allows it to pass. No commentary, no follow-up, no attempt to finish it. This is not distraction. Distraction pulls attention away forcefully. This is something else. This is disinterest. The brain is no longer motivated to fix, complete, or resolve what appears in awareness. Motivation requires reward. Problem solving is usually rewarded by relief, control, or preparedness for the future. Tonight, none of those rewards exist. So the brain quietly stops offering effort, and when effort disappears, something ancient takes its place. Wandering, not the restless wandering of boredom, not the anxious wandering of avoidance, a slower, older kind of wandering, the kind that predates schedules, deadlines, and productivity, the kind that existed when humans sat near firelight, watching shadows move without purpose. This mode of mind does not move toward answers. It drifts among impressions. You might notice this now. Thoughts no longer feel like questions. They feel like shapes, textures, moments without edges. An image flickers and fades. A sound memory appears without context. A sensation moves through the body without needing explanation. Nothing connects, and nothing needs to. The brain has stopped building bridges between ideas. Connection is a cognitive effort. It requires direction. It assumes continuity matters. Tonight, continuity does not matter, so the mind lets go of structure. This wandering state is not random. It follows a different logic, one that does not aim forward. Instead of asking what comes next, the brain allows experience to unfold wherever it wants. This is why wandering often feels dreamlike, even before sleep begins. The brain is switching from linear processing to associative processing. But even association is loose here. Ideas do not point to each other. They simply coexist. You might feel as if your mind is gently drifting through internal landscapes without trying to map them. There is no destination, no route, just movement. This movement is effortless. Effort is what made thinking feel heavy earlier. Without effort, thinking becomes light, almost transparent. You may notice now that awareness feels less like a spotlight and more like a soft glow. Diffuse, evenly spread, not focused on any one thing. This glow does not judge. It does not evaluate. It does not prioritize. Everything that appears within it is equal. Equal things do not compete. Without competition, tension disappears. This is why the body continues to deepen into stillness now. Muscles no longer make micro adjustments. Posture settles fully. The sense of holding yourself upright, even while lying down, releases. The brain is no longer coordinating action, so the body stops preparing for it. Breathing continues in its slow rhythm, but even that rhythm begins to feel less noticeable. Not because it changes, but because attention no longer needs to stay with it. The breath becomes background, and when breath becomes background, the mind loses another anchor to wakefulness. Anchors keep awareness oriented. Tonight, orientation is unnecessary, so anchors loosen one by one. You may notice moments now where awareness seems to drift away entirely, then return without explanation. These are not interruptions. They are crossings. The brain is testing how far it can wander without losing safety. Each time it wanders and nothing happens, no threat, no demand, it learns. It learns that wandering is allowed, that learning is powerful. Most of your life wandering has been discouraged. Wandering thoughts are labeled unproductive. Wandering attention is corrected. Wandering minds are brought back to task. Tonight, wandering is the task, and the brain responds with relief. You might feel this relief as a sense of openness behind the eyes, a release in the forehead, a softening of mental pressure you didn't know was there. This is the brain stepping out of executive mode. Executive mode manages, wandering mode observes. Observation without intent is deeply restful. It allows information to flow without being organized. It allows sensation to exist without meaning. It allows memory to surface without relevance. This state uses far less energy than problem solving. The brain recognizes this efficiency immediately. And because the brain is designed to conserve energy whenever possible, it stays here. You may notice now that the sense of you feels thinner, not gone, just less solid. Identity depends on narrative, on a story connecting past, present, and future. Wandering does not require narrative, so identity loosens. You're still here, but not defined. Defined by nothing. And this feels safe because nothing needs definition tonight. The world does not require explanation, neither do you. In this wandering state, time becomes especially strange. You may feel as if you have been here a long time, or no time at all. The brain is no longer marking duration. Duration matters only when something is expected to happen. Nothing is expected, so time dissolves into a sense of ongoingness. This ongoingness is soothing. It feels like floating in a slow current that does not pull you anywhere specific. You do not need to swim. You do not need to steer. You are carried. This is where many people fully fall asleep. But even if you remain aware, awareness is now deeply altered. It is no longer attached to control, planning, or problem solving. It is simply present within wandering. This is a pre-sleep state older than language. Infants enter it naturally. Animals enter it without thought. Humans forgot it when thinking became constant. Tonight, the brain remembers. And as it remembers, it begins to shut down one more layer of effort, the effort to stay oriented in space. You may notice that your sense of where your body is becomes vague. Edges blur. The boundary between your body and the surface beneath you feels less distinct. This is not dissociation. It is integration. The brain no longer needs to maintain a sharp body map when no movement is planned. So the map softens. Soft maps require less energy. This energy is redirected inward to processes that restore, repair, and rebalance. You may feel a subtle warmth now, or a sense of internal heaviness that is comforting rather than oppressive. This is the body settling into itself. The wandering mind allows this to happen because it is no longer interfering. Interference often comes from thinking. Thinking asks questions. Wandering does not. So the brain sinks deeper into this mode. Thoughts become rarer now. When they appear, they are faint, like distant echoes rather than active ideas. They do not pull attention with them. They pass through the glow of awareness and fade. This fading is important. It means the mind is no longer holding on to content. Content requires memory. Memory requires structure. Structure requires effort. Effort is no longer being supplied. So content dissolves. What remains is sensation without story, presence without direction, awareness without agenda. This is the final threshold before sleep takes over completely. The brain recognizes this state as ideal. It has removed urgency. It has removed planning. It has removed problem solving. Only wandering remains. And wandering naturally slows. It becomes less active, less image-based, less sensory. Eventually, wandering itself thins. It stretches out into longer and longer pauses between impressions. Pauses where nothing appears at all. These pauses are not blank. They are full of rest. They are moments where the brain is fully unoccupied. Unoccupied brains sleep easily because there is nothing left to do. You may find yourself slipping into these pauses now, entering them without noticing, staying there a little longer each time. This is not something you need to control. In fact, control would pull you back. The brain knows what it is doing. It is following a path it has walked every night, even if you were not aware of it. Tonight, you are simply not interfering. And because you are not interfering, the descent continues smoothly, from wandering to drifting, from drifting to absence, from awareness that observes to awareness that no longer needs to be present at all. And as the brain releases the last habits of solving, organizing, and holding experience together, it prepares to enter a state where even wandering fades, where nothing moves, where nothing is tracked, where nothing is required. And that is where the next movement quietly carries you. Before there were schedules, the brain slept differently. Not better, not worse, just differently. There was no clear line between day and night the way we understand it now. No alarm slicing through darkness. No precise hour when rest was supposed to begin. Sleep arrived when it arrived, and wakefulness faded when it faded. The brain learned to follow cycles, not clocks. Tonight, without a tomorrow waiting, your brain is quietly returning to that older rhythm. It is no longer asking what time is it. It is no longer counting how long this has taken. It is no longer tracking progress. Progress belongs to a world with plans. Cycles belong to a world without them. You may notice this shift as a gentle loss of structure in your experience. Moments blend into each other. The sense of sequence dissolves. There is no clear before or after, only a continuous flow. This is not confusion. It is reorientation. The brain is remembering how to move through time without measuring it. Long before calendars, the nervous system learned to read subtler signals. Light fading, temperature dropping, energy waning. These cues told the brain when to slow down, when to let go. Those cues are still present. They have just been drowned out by artificial urgency. Tonight, urgency is absent, so the older signals become audible again. You may feel a deeper heaviness now, not the heaviness of exhaustion, but the weight of night itself, as if darkness has substance, as if rest is something you are gradually entering rather than something you fall into. This is cyclical sleep. It does not arrive all at once. It unfolds. The brain follows a familiar arc, one it has traced thousands of times over human history, a gradual dimming, a soft narrowing of awareness, a slow surrender to rhythm. There is no edge to this arc, no sharp drop, just a gentle curve downward. You may notice that your thoughts, already sparse, feel even more distant now. When they appear, they feel out of place, like voices echoing in a large, empty room. They don't belong here, and the brain knows it, so it stops responding to them. This is different from ignoring. Ignoring requires effort. This is simply not engaging. Engagement is what keeps thoughts alive. Without engagement, they fade on their own. The brain prefers this approach. It saves energy. Energy conservation is one of the brain's oldest priorities. When resources are limited, unnecessary processes are shut down first. Planning is one of those processes. Planning burns fuel. It simulates futures. It prepares responses. It keeps neural circuits active and ready. Tonight, those circuits are quiet. The brain has decided they are not needed, so it reallocates energy inward toward slower, deeper processes that do not require awareness. This is when the sense of self becomes especially faint, not gone, just less important. Identity, as you usually experience it, depends on continuity, on memory linking past to future, on a story that explains who you are and where you are going. Without a future, that story has no next chapter, so it pauses. You are still here, but without narrative weight. This can feel strange, even a little unreal, but it is deeply natural. It is how consciousness feels when it is no longer tasked with becoming something. You may feel now as if you are resting inside yourself rather than observing yourself from a distance. The sense of being behind the eyes softens. Awareness spreads through the body instead of hovering above it. This is the brain shifting from external orientation to internal regulation. External orientation tracks the world. Internal regulation maintains balance. Balance does not require thought. It requires rhythm. Your breath continues its slow, unforced cycle. Each inhale arrives without effort. Each exhale releases without instruction. You may no longer be aware of breathing at all, and that is a sign of safety. The nervous system breathes best when it is not watched. The heart follows suit. Its rhythm becomes less noticeable, less pronounced. Not because it slows dramatically, but because awareness is no longer checking in on it. Checking creates contrast. Without checking, everything blends. The blending is soothing. The brain prefers smooth gradients over sharp transitions when it is resting. That is why dreams often feel fluid, why images morph instead of change abruptly, why sleep itself feels like drifting rather than stopping. Tonight, that fluidity is already present. You may notice subtle imagery now, not dreams, not scenes, but impressions. Colors without shape, movements without direction, sensations without location. These are not messages. They are signs that the brain is entering a mode where perception is decoupled from the external world. This mode is ancient. It predates language. It predates self-reflection. It is a state of awareness that exists purely to allow restoration. The brain does not need to understand what happens here. It only needs to allow it. And because there is no tomorrow demanding preparation, allowance is easy. The mind no longer resists these impressions. It does not try to interpret them. It does not ask what they mean. Meaning is another future-oriented function. Tonight, meaning is optional. So, impressions pass through gently, like ripples on water. Each ripple fades before another arrives. Sometimes there are no ripples at all, just stillness. Stillness does not feel empty here. It feels full, full of rest, full of nothing needing to happen. This is the quality of night the brain recognizes as safe. Not quiet because something is missing, but quiet because everything is settled. The body feels this deeply. Muscles have reached their final resting state. There are no more adjustments, no more shifts, no more micro movements. The body has stopped negotiating with gravity. It has accepted support completely. That acceptance frees even more mental energy. The brain uses this energy to deepen internal processes that work best when awareness is minimal. Repair, rebalancing, consolidation. These words are too technical to feel, but their effects are tangible. You may feel a sense of internal smoothing, as if sharp edges inside you are rounding off, as if rough places are being gently worn down. This is not something you experience consciously. It is something you allow to happen by not interfering. Interference usually comes from thought, but thought has grown quiet now, so interference stops. The brain recognizes this state as optimal. It does not rush it, it settles into it. You may feel now as if you are hovering just above sleep or already inside it without realizing. This in-between state is delicate but stable. The brain is no longer trying to hold on to wakefulness. It is simply letting it thin. Thin awareness requires very little energy. Soon, even that energy will be redirected elsewhere. But the brain will not force that transition. It waits. Waiting without impatience is another sign that planning has ended. There is no deadline for sleep. It will arrive when it arrives. And because there is no urgency, it arrives smoothly. You may notice longer gaps now, moments where nothing registers at all. No thoughts, no sensations, no awareness you can recall. Then, gently, awareness returns, only to fade again. These gaps are not lost time. They are entry points. Each one takes you deeper. Each one teaches the brain that it is safe to let go completely. And as these gaps grow longer and more frequent, the distinction between being awake and being asleep loses relevance. The brain no longer cares which side you are on. It only cares that you are resting. This is the wisdom of cycles, not pushing, not pulling, just turning. And as the cycle continues to carry you away from structure, away from narrative, away from self-monitoring, it moves you toward a state where even awareness of rest is no longer necessary, where the brain does what it has always known how to do when the night is long and the future is quiet, and that is where the next movement gently waits. At some point during the night, planning becomes a kind of background noise, not something you are actively doing, not something you are consciously thinking about, just a faint residue, like a sound you didn't realize was there until it stopped. For most of your life, planning has never fully turned off. Even in rest, it hums quietly beneath awareness, a low, constant vibration of what comes next. What should I remember? What might matter later? You may not hear it clearly during the day because it blends into everything else. It disguises itself as responsibility, as foresight, as being a functioning human in the world. But tonight, with no tomorrow to prepare for, that hum is fading. And as it fades, you begin to notice how loud it always was. Planning is not just about schedules. It is a way of holding the mind forward, tilting attention away from the present and toward a version of reality that does not yet exist. That tilt requires effort. So much effort, in fact, that most people grow tired without knowing why. They think they are exhausted from work or stress or lack of sleep, but often they are exhausted from constantly living slightly ahead of themselves. Tonight, that forward tilt is gone. The mind is no longer leaning into the future. It is standing upright, then slowly, gently, sitting back. You may feel this as a release in the forehead, a sense that something behind the eyes has finally stopped pushing. That pressure was not thought itself. It was anticipation. Anticipation keeps neural circuits warm. It keeps possibilities active. It keeps attention half engaged, even when nothing is happening. Without anticipation, the brain cools. Not in temperature, but in tone. Everything softens. Thoughts lose their edge. Sensations lose their urgency. Awareness loses its grip. You may notice now that when a thought appears, it feels unfinished, not because it was interrupted, but because the mind no longer insists on completing it. Completion is another form of planning. To finish a thought is to prepare it for use. Tonight, there is no use, so the brain lets thoughts trail off naturally, like sentences that don't need an ending. This trailing off is deeply calming. It signals that nothing is being held in reserve. Nothing needs to be carried forward. You may notice that your mind feels flatter now, not dull, but smooth, less dimensional, less layered. This is what happens when the future stops adding weight to the present. Without the future, the present becomes lighter, not brighter, not happier, just lighter. The brain responds to this lightness by shifting into a mode it rarely occupies while awake, a mode where it does not need to prioritize. Prioritization is effortful. It requires constant comparison. This over that, now over later, important over unimportant. When there is no later, comparison loses meaning. Everything becomes equal. Equal experiences do not compete. Without competition, the mind rests. You may feel this as a sense of mental quiet that is deeper than silence. Silence is simply the absence of sound. This quiet is the absence of sorting. No internal voice asking which thought matters more. No subtle ranking of sensations. No hierarchy of experience. Everything that arises is allowed, and everything that fades is allowed to fade. This equality creates a deep internal neutrality. Neutrality is not emptiness, it is balance. The nervous system thrives on balance. When balance is present, it no longer needs to compensate. Compensation is what creates tension. Throughout the day, your body compensates constantly, adjusting posture, regulating breath, modulating emotion to fit circumstances. Tonight, there is nothing to compensate for, so those systems stand down. You may notice that even your sense of effort has almost disappeared now. Being awake no longer feels active. It feels passive, like floating rather than swimming. This is an important shift. Swimming requires constant correction. Floating requires trust. The brain is floating now. It trusts that nothing will pull it under. This trust is built on repetition. Nothing has happened for a long time. No demand, no interruption, no consequence. The brain has recorded this pattern, and patterns are what the brain believes most. You may notice now that awareness itself feels quieter, not just in content, but in quality. It is thinner, more transparent. You are still aware, but awareness is no longer asserting itself. It does not announce, "I am here." It simply is. This state is difficult to describe because description itself is a planning function. Language points, defines, moves attention. Tonight, attention does not need direction, so words become unnecessary. You may notice that if a word or phrase appears in your mind, it dissolves quickly. Language feels heavy here, too structured. The brain prefers sensation now, sensation without interpretation. You might feel subtle pulses, gentle waves of internal movement, a sense of slow expansion and contraction that does not correspond exactly to breath. These are deeper rhythms, rhythms that operate continuously, regardless of awareness. The brain is turning toward them because they require no thought. This is where restoration deepens. When planning recedes fully into the background, the brain gains access to bandwidth it rarely has during the day. That bandwidth is not used for thinking. It is used for maintenance, for recalibration, for quiet work that only happens when the system is undisturbed. You may feel this as a subtle sense of internal order returning, as if scattered pieces are settling back into place without effort. Nothing dramatic, nothing you can point to, just a sense that things are smoothing out. This smoothing is the opposite of stimulation. Stimulation excites the system. Smoothing calms it. The brain prefers smoothing at night. And because nothing is interrupting that process, it continues uninterrupted. You may notice now that the idea of tomorrow feels distant, almost unreal, not worrying, not comforting, just irrelevant. This irrelevance is the final stage of letting go. Tomorrow has not been rejected, it has simply lost its power. Power comes from attention. Without attention, even the most important things fade temporarily. This fading is healthy. It gives the brain permission to rest deeply without keeping one eye open for the future. That permission is rare, and once granted, the brain does not waste it. You may feel moments now where awareness drops out completely, longer than before. When you return, it may feel as though nothing happened in between. Those moments are not gaps. They are depths. Depths where awareness is no longer needed. Each time you pass through one, the brain learns that it can go further. It learns that letting go does not mean disappearing. It means resting, and rest is safe. The mind no longer questions this. Questioning requires curiosity. Curiosity requires energy. Energy is being conserved now, so questioning stops. You may notice now that your sense of self feels very faint, not fragile, just quiet. You're not thinking about who you are. You are not monitoring how you feel. You are not observing your own state. Self-observation has ended. This is one of the deepest forms of rest. Most people never fully stop observing themselves while awake. There is always a part of the mind checking in, commenting, evaluating. Tonight, that observer is asleep, and without the observer, experience simplifies dramatically. There is no commentary layer, no interpretation, no distance between sensation and awareness. They merge. This merging creates a sense of wholeness, not excitement, not pleasure. Wholeness. The nervous system recognizes wholeness as a signal to deepen rest even further. So it does. You may notice now that your body feels completely still, not frozen, but finished, as if it has reached its final position and no longer needs to adjust. This stillness is comfortable. It does not feel forced. It feels chosen by the body itself. The brain no longer sends signals to move because movement is unnecessary. Immobility is safe here, safe enough to surrender fully. As planning fades entirely into background noise, barely audible, barely present, the mind enters a state where even background noise is optional. The hum drops lower, lower than thought, lower than awareness. It becomes something you no longer notice at all. This is the quietest point before sleep, not the moment of falling asleep, but the moment when nothing stands in the way of it. The future is gone. Control is gone. Planning is gone. Only the body remains, breathing on its own. Only the brain remains, regulating without awareness. Only the night remains, deep and unobserved. You do not need to follow this any further. In fact, following would bring you back. The brain does not want you to follow, it wants you to drift, and drifting requires nothing from you. So allow the last traces of mental noise to fade into the background completely. Allow the sense of self to thin even more. Allow awareness to become optional. Because as the brain settles into this state, where planning is nothing more than a distant echo, and even that echo is fading, it prepares to cross into a phase where awareness no longer returns at all, where rest becomes complete, where the night continues without being watched, and where the next movement no longer needs to be described because description itself has finally become unnecessary. There is a stage of the night where even effortlessness becomes unnecessary. Up until now, the mind has been letting go in layers. First control, then planning, then anxiety, then the habit of solving. Each layer falling away not because it was forced, but because it was no longer useful. Now, something subtler begins to happen. The brain stops monitoring its own descent. This is important. As long as the mind is aware that it is relaxing, drifting, or almost asleep, there is still a thin thread of supervision running through awareness, a quiet witness keeping track of where you are. Tonight, that witness grows tired, not suddenly, not dramatically. It simply loses interest. Monitoring requires comparison. Am I more relaxed than before? Am I asleep yet? How deep is this? All of those questions depend on reference points. But reference points require structure. And structure has already dissolved. So the mind releases the need to measure its own state. You may notice this as a soft blankness, not a void, not emptiness, but a lack of internal commentary. Awareness is still present, but it no longer feels like it belongs to anyone. There is experience, without an experiencer standing apart from it. This shift is subtle, but profound. Most waking awareness is divided. There is what is felt, and there is the one who feels it. That division creates distance. Distance requires effort to maintain. Tonight, distance collapses. Feeling and being merge. You're no longer aware of your body, you're simply within it. You're no longer aware of the night, you're inside it. This merging reduces effort even further. Effortlessness becomes the default. The nervous system responds immediately. When awareness stops supervising, deeper regulatory systems take over completely. These systems do not ask permission, they do not check in, they do not report back, they simply work. You may notice now that your breathing feels almost invisible, not shallow, not deep, just happening. It no longer anchors attention, it no longer stands out. This is a sign that the brain no longer needs conscious reassurance. The heart follows a similar pattern. Its rhythm becomes background noise, not because it is weak, but because attention has withdrawn from it. Without attention, internal signals blend into a unified field. Nothing stands out. Standing out is a sign of importance. Tonight, nothing is important. This neutrality is deeply restful. The brain thrives in neutral states because they allow it to redistribute resources freely. Without priorities, energy flows where it is most needed, toward repair, consolidation, and rebalancing. You may feel this as a gentle sense of internal settling, as if scattered elements inside you are quietly aligning without instruction. There is no sensation of fixing. Fixing implies something was wrong. This is simply returning to balance. Balance does not announce itself. It just feels steady. You may notice now that your thoughts have almost entirely disappeared, not because you are suppressing them, but because there is nothing left to generate them. Thoughts arise in response to needs, questions, goals, problems, curiosity. Tonight, none of these are active. So thought production slows to a near stop. Occasionally, a fragment may appear, a word, an image, a fleeting impression, but it does not fully enter awareness. It dissolves before it can be noticed clearly. This is the mind's way of closing itself gently, like a door that doesn't slam but drifts shut on its own. You're not pushing it. You're not holding it open. You're simply no longer involved. This is where many people lose track of whether they are awake or asleep. That distinction no longer matters. Awake and asleep are labels the mind uses to orient itself in time. They help determine what actions are possible or appropriate. But tonight, no action is required, so the distinction fades. You may feel moments of nothingness now, periods where there is no memory, no sensation, no awareness you can recall. Then, softly, awareness returns, only to fade again. These are not interruptions. They are the rhythm of descent. Each return is weaker than the last. Each fade lasts a little longer. The brain is testing complete disengagement, and each time it disengages and nothing goes wrong, confidence builds. Confidence allows surrender. Surrender allows depth. Depth allows rest. This is the quiet progression the brain follows when it feels unobserved. During the day, even when alone, the mind often feels watched by expectation, by responsibility, by the future itself. Tonight, there is no watcher, so the brain behaves differently. It no longer maintains the illusion of continuity, the sense that you are a single, consistent entity moving through time loses relevance. Identity softens further, not erased, just not needed. You are no longer someone doing rest. You are rest. This state cannot be forced. If you tried to reach it intentionally, you would miss it entirely. It only appears when intention steps aside, and intention has been gone for a while now. You may notice that sensations have become extremely vague. The body feels distant or large or diffuse, or perhaps you feel no body at all. This is normal. The brain reduces body mapping when movement is unnecessary. Detailed representation requires energy. When the body is still and safe, the map simplifies. You are not losing connection to your body. You are conserving resources. The nervous system recognizes this as optimal. This is why the sense of space may feel altered now. Boundaries blur. Inside and outside feel less distinct. You may feel as though you're sinking into the surface beneath you, or floating above it, or simply existing without location. Location is another cognitive construct. It tells the brain where to send signals. When no signals need to be sent, location fades. This is the brain entering its deepest pre-sleep mode, a mode where awareness is optional, thought is unnecessary, and the body is fully entrusted to automatic regulation. You do not need to go any further. In fact, going further is not something you do. The brain will take over completely from here, but before it does, there is often a brief moment of absolute quiet, not silence, quiet. A state where nothing is being processed at all. No sound, no image, no sensation, no sense of self. Just absence. This absence is not empty. It is full of rest. It is the threshold. Most people cross it without realizing. One moment they are aware, the next they are gone. Gone not as in lost, gone as in released. The night continues without them, and that is exactly how the brain prefers it. You may already be crossing that threshold now. If awareness returns briefly, it will be faint. If it fades again, it will fade deeper. There is no need to hold on to this moment. Holding is effort, and effort has no place here. The brain has waited patiently for this point, where nothing is required, nothing is monitored, nothing is remembered. From here, sleep does not need to be invited. It simply arrives, naturally, inevitably, quietly, and as awareness continues to thin, slipping between moments, losing form, losing reference, the brain releases the last remnants of waking organization, allowing the night to take over completely, allowing rest to become total, and allowing whatever comes next to unfold without being witnessed at all. At this depth of the night, the brain no longer recognizes effort as something separate from rest. Earlier, letting go still felt like a process. Layers fell away, habits dissolved, awareness thinned gradually, as if something were being undone step by step. Now, even the sense of undoing is gone. Nothing is being released anymore, because nothing is being held. This is a subtle but decisive shift. Up until this point, the mind still had a reference to wakefulness, even faintly, even distantly. There was still a sense, however vague, that awareness was something that could return, something that might reform. Here, that reference weakens, not abruptly, not dramatically. It simply stops being refreshed. The brain no longer checks whether you are aware. Checking is a function of responsibility, and responsibility ended several chapters ago. You may notice now that awareness feels extremely fragile, like a thin mist that disperses as soon as you notice it. The moment you realize you are aware, that realization dissolves. This is not instability, it is the opposite. Awareness no longer needs reinforcement. Normally, consciousness sustains itself by looping, by noticing itself noticing. That loop keeps awareness active. It creates the feeling of being here. Tonight, the loop has broken, and without the loop, awareness does not collapse. It rests. Resting awareness feels very different from active awareness. Active awareness looks outward. It tracks. It evaluates. It maintains boundaries. Resting awareness does none of these things. It has no direction. It does not sit behind the eyes. It does not occupy the head. It does not center anywhere. If it exists at all, it exists everywhere at once, or nowhere in particular. This is why location has become meaningless. You may no longer feel clearly where your body is, or whether you're lying down or floating, or whether there is a boundary between you and the space around you. These questions do not arise because the mind no longer needs answers. Answers serve action. Action is impossible here. So inquiry stops. The brain has entered a phase where it no longer simulates reality. Simulation is expensive. It requires continuous updating, continuous prediction, continuous correction. Earlier in the night, simulation gradually shut down, first of the future, then of problems, then of identity. Now simulation of the present itself is fading. The brain is no longer actively constructing the experience of now. Instead, it allows raw existence to continue without representation. This is difficult to imagine while fully awake. But you are not fully awake now. You are also not asleep. You are in a third state, one that sits quietly between them. In this state, experience does not organize itself into events. There is no sequence, no timeline, no sense of progression. Moments do not follow each other. They dissolve into one another. You may feel as though time has stopped, or that it never existed. This is not timelessness in a dramatic sense. It is simply the absence of tracking. Tracking time is something the mind does for planning. Without planning, time loses relevance. So the brain stops measuring it. This frees an enormous amount of energy. That energy does not return to awareness. It goes deeper, into systems that regulate chemistry, temperature, immune response, memory consolidation, emotional recalibration. These systems do not require consciousness. In fact, they work best without it. This is why the brain prefers to operate unobserved at night. Observation interferes. It introduces judgment, interpretation, concern. Here, there is no observation, or rather, there is no observer. Experience continues, but without a center. This is why you may feel as though you are disappearing, not in a frightening way, in a neutral way, as if the idea of you is becoming irrelevant. This is not loss, it is relief. Identity is heavy. It carries history, expectation, responsibility, continuity. The brain does not need identity to rest, so it sets it down. Without identity, there is no one to be tired. Without someone to be tired, rest deepens automatically. You may notice now that emotional tone has flattened completely. Not numbness, neutrality. No sadness, no happiness, no anticipation, no fear. Emotion requires narrative. Narrative requires time. Time has already dissolved. So emotion becomes background sensation at most. Often, even that fades. The nervous system recognizes this neutrality as the safest possible state. When nothing stands out, nothing threatens. So the brain relaxes further. You may feel a sense of sinking now, not physically, but existentially, as if you're falling into something soft that has no bottom. This sensation is common at this stage. It is not falling, it is yielding. The brain is yielding control of awareness entirely, not handing it to sleep yet, just letting it go. When control is released at this depth, awareness becomes intermittent. It flickers, not on and off sharply, more like a candle guttering in still air. Sometimes there is a faint glow, sometimes there is nothing at all. The brain does not try to stabilize the flame. Stabilization requires effort. Effort has no function here, so the flame is allowed to fade when it wants, and return briefly when it wants. Each return is weaker. Each absence lasts longer. Eventually, the absences dominate. You may already be experiencing this, moments where there is simply nothing, no sensation you can recall, no thought you can name, no awareness you remember having. Then perhaps a brief return, a vague sense of being here, followed by another fade. This is not something to notice deliberately. Deliberate noticing would re-engage the mind. If noticing happens, it will happen on its own, and if it does, it will dissolve quickly, because the brain no longer maintains awareness as a priority. Awareness has become optional. This is the last gate before true sleep. Sleep does not begin when you feel sleepy. It begins when the brain stops caring whether awareness continues. Caring is an emotional investment. Investment has already ended, so the transition becomes inevitable. You may feel now that your mind is no longer generating any internal images at all, or that images appear and vanish before forming. You may feel that language has completely disappeared. No words, no concepts, no labels. Language is one of the last tools to be set down. It structures experience. Without it, experience becomes undifferentiated. This undifferentiation is exactly what the brain needs. It allows memories to be reorganized without interference. It allows emotional charge to dissipate. It allows neural circuits to reset. You do not need to witness this. In fact, witnessing would reduce its effectiveness. So the brain removes the witness. What remains is pure physiological rhythm. Breath happens, heart beats, cells repair, signals recalibrate. No one is in charge. No one needs to be. You are no longer falling asleep. Sleep is already happening, just without you noticing. And if awareness returns briefly, just enough for you to sense this moment, that awareness will be thin, distant, almost transparent. It will not pull you back. It will fade again on its own because there is no reason for it to stay. The night is doing its work now. unobserved, uninterrupted, unplanned, exactly as it prefers. And as this chapter dissolves, not into the next, but into absence itself, the brain continues forward into a phase where even the idea of chapters becomes irrelevant, where there is no sequence to follow, where nothing remains to be narrated, and where the night unfolds in complete silence, without memory, without awareness, without return, until much later a new cycle begins on its own. At this point in the night, the brain has stopped distinguishing between rest and existence. Earlier, rest still felt like something that was happening to you, a direction you were moving toward, a depth you were entering. There was still a subtle sense of transition, of crossing from one state into another. Now even that sense dissolves. There is no movement anymore, not forward, not downward, not inward. Movement implies distance. Distance implies separation, and separation no longer exists. The brain has arrived at a state where being and resting are no longer different things. This is not a place. It has no coordinates, no texture, no identifiable features. It is simply the condition that remains when nothing is being maintained. During the day, the brain is constantly maintaining things: attention, posture, emotion, identity, narrative. Even in moments of stillness, there is maintenance happening underneath. Systems checking systems, signals confirming signals. Maintenance creates noise, not loud noise, but persistent noise, a hum of internal activity that never quite stops. Tonight, that hum has gone quiet. And when the hum disappears, the brain does something it rarely does while awake. It stops referencing itself. Self-reference is the loop that keeps awareness alive. The sense of I am aware depends on awareness turning back on itself again and again. Here, that loop has fallen apart. Awareness does not reflect. It does not observe itself. It simply flickers or does not. You may feel moments now where awareness seems to vanish completely, not returning for what feels like a long time. When it does return, there is no sense of having been gone, no gap, no absence, just a sudden faint presence like a light briefly passing through fog. This is because memory is no longer recording experience. Recording is a form of preparation. It preserves information for later use. There is no later, so recording stops. Without recording, even if awareness exists briefly, it leaves no trace. Nothing is remembered, nothing is marked. This is one of the deepest forms of rest the brain can enter without fully shutting down consciousness. The brain is not asleep yet, but it is no longer awake in any meaningful sense. It is operating in a mode where awareness is tolerated but unnecessary, like a room that can be entered but is no longer occupied. The nervous system prefers this state. It allows resources to be diverted away from consciousness and into internal processes that require privacy. Privacy matters. When awareness watches, systems behave differently. They hesitate, they check, they adjust. When unobserved, they work freely. This is why the brain evolved to sleep, not just to rest, but to work without being watched. Tonight, that privacy has arrived early. You may notice that sensations have almost completely vanished, not because the body is numb, but because sensation requires attention to be felt distinctly. Without attention, sensation blends into a background that has no edges. Pain disappears first, then comfort, then even neutrality. What remains is not sensation, but condition, the condition of being alive without commentary. You're not aware of your body now. You're not unaware of it either. The distinction no longer matters. The brain has reduced the resolution of experience to its lowest possible setting. High resolution is useful for action. Low resolution is ideal for restoration. In this low resolution state, the brain can recalibrate without distraction. It can rebalance neurotransmitters. It can reorganize memory traces. It can release emotional residue that was never processed. These things do not happen in sequence. They do not require awareness. They simply unfold. And because they unfold without being named, they feel like nothing is happening. Nothing happening is exactly what the brain wants. You may feel now as if you are suspended in a kind of blankness, not dark, not light, not empty, not full. Just neutral. This neutrality is not absence. It is equilibrium. Equilibrium does not draw attention to itself. It feels like nothing because nothing is out of balance. This is why the brain does not try to hold on to awareness here. Awareness would only add noise, so the brain lets it drift in and out without concern. If awareness appears, it appears faintly. If it fades completely. Neither state is preferred. Preference implies choice. Choice implies agency. Agency implies responsibility. Responsibility is gone. The brain has handed itself over to automatic regulation. This handoff is total. There is no executive oversight, no monitoring, no correction, just cycles running quietly beneath the surface. You may feel now that even the idea of sleep has disappeared. Earlier, sleep was something approaching. Now, it is irrelevant. The brain no longer frames its state in terms of sleeping or waking. Those are categories used by the waking mind. Here, there are no categories, only condition. The condition of being offline enough to rest, but not yet fully unconscious. This is a delicate balance, but the brain maintains it effortlessly. Effort is not required when nothing resists, and nothing resists here. You may feel moments of complete absence now, long stretches where there is no awareness, no thought, no sensation. Then perhaps a brief return. But these returns do not bring clarity. They bring only the faintest sense of something is happening, before dissolving again. These returns are not failures to sleep. They are remnants of consciousness losing coherence. Coherence requires continuity. Continuity requires memory. Memory has already stopped recording. So awareness cannot stabilize. It appears and vanishes without consequence. This is why, later, if you wake, you will not remember this stage. It leaves no trace. It is not meant to. It is the brain passing through a narrow corridor where nothing can be carried, not even identity. You are not you here, not because you are gone, but because you is a construct that requires narrative. Narrative has ended. Without narrative, there is no center. Without a center, there is no perspective. Without perspective, experience does not organize itself around a point. It simply exists, or does not. This is the deepest pre-dream state. A place where dreams have not yet formed, but waking imagery has dissolved. A place of pure potential without manifestation. The brain hovers here briefly, or sometimes for long periods, depending on how safe it feels. Tonight, it feels safe. Nothing has disturbed it. Nothing has called it back. Nothing has demanded explanation. So it stays. And as it stays, the boundary between this state and full sleep becomes meaningless. At some point, unmarked, unnoticed, the brain will tip fully into sleep, not with a sensation, not with a signal, not with a moment you can identify. It will simply happen. One cycle will complete, another will begin. You will not be there to witness it. And that is the point. The brain does not want you present for what comes next. What comes next is work, quiet work, deep work, unobserved work, work that requires no awareness at all. So awareness fades completely, not as an ending, but as a pause so complete that it feels like nothing. And in that nothing, the brain finally rests without qualification, no plan, no tomorrow, no self, just the night continuing on its own, unrecorded, unremembered, doing exactly what it was always meant to do. What comes after awareness fades is not darkness. Darkness is still something you can notice. What comes next is quieter than that. It is the absence of noticing itself. Earlier, awareness thinned, flickered, lost coherence. It appeared and disappeared without leaving memory behind. That was the last phase where consciousness still mattered at all. Now, even that distinction no longer holds. The brain has crossed into a state where awareness is no longer part of the process, not suppressed, not removed, simply unnecessary. This is difficult to describe because description itself depends on awareness being present long enough to hold a thought. Here, nothing holds, nothing persists. There is no now stretching forward, no moment passing into another, no internal marker saying this is happening. The brain has stopped constructing experience. Construction is effort. Effort was already gone. So construction dissolves too. What remains is not experience, but condition. The condition of a system fully at rest while still alive. During the day, the brain is busy representing the world. It builds images, sounds, meanings, expectations, even when your eyes are closed. It continues simulating reality. Here, simulation has stopped, not gradually, not intentionally. It simply no longer runs. You're not inside a dream yet. Dreams require imagery. Imagery requires narrative fragments. Narrative requires memory to stitch moments together. Memory has been offline for a while now, so dreams cannot form yet. Instead, the brain rests in a pre-dream stillness, a state so quiet that nothing distinguishes it from nothing at all. You may not remember entering this state. You may not remember leaving it. That is because remembering requires recording, and recording is absent here. This state exists precisely because it leaves no trace. It is a reset, a clearing, a blank interval where the brain does its most fundamental recalibration. Neural circuits that were stretched thin during the day loosen. Connections that fired too often slow down. Patterns that became rigid soften. None of this requires consciousness. In fact, consciousness would interfere, so the brain keeps it out. This is why there is no sense of time here. Time requires sequence. Sequence requires distinction. Distinction requires awareness. Without awareness, there is no before or after. There is only a kind of suspended neutrality, not floating, not sinking, not resting in anything, just being offline. If awareness were to return for a moment, which it sometimes does, it would be so faint that it would feel like a mistake, a glitch, a whisper that vanishes before it can be recognized. But even that becomes rare. The brain prefers this depth. Here, nothing competes for resources, no thoughts requesting energy, no sensations demanding interpretation, no identity insisting on continuity. Energy flows inward, toward maintenance alone. This is where the brain repairs itself most efficiently. Chemical balances reset, emotional residue diffuses. Information from the day is sorted without narrative. Sorting without narrative is crucial. Narrative adds meaning. Meaning adds weight. Here, memories are stripped of weight. They are reduced to raw data, patterns of activation without story. This allows the brain to keep what is useful and discard what is not, without emotional interference. This is why you sometimes wake feeling lighter without knowing why. Something heavy was released here, but you will never know what. Knowing would require memory. And memory was not allowed in. The body participates fully in this state. Muscle tone is at its lowest functional level, not limp, not tense, neutral. Breath continues without rhythm you can notice. Heartbeat continues without awareness. Hormones shift. Immune responses adjust. Internal temperature finds its balance. All of this happens without sensation. Sensation requires awareness, and awareness is absent. You are not experiencing rest. Rest is happening. This is an important difference. Experiencing rest still implies a subject. Here, there is no subject, just a system in equilibrium. The brain remains in this state for as long as it needs. There is no countdown, no internal clock measuring progress. Sleep stages are not something the brain watches. They are something it becomes. Eventually, slowly, naturally, another transition will occur, but not yet. First, the brain stays here, in this place with no markers, no texture, no memory. This is the quietest point of the night. Not deep sleep yet, but the doorway to it, a threshold that is crossed without crossing, a pause so complete that even the idea of pausing disappears. This is where effortlessness reaches its final form. Earlier, effortlessness still existed relative to effort. Here, even that contrast dissolves. There is no effort and no concept of effortlessness, just neutrality. The brain does not hold on to this state forever. It is transitional. But while it lasts, nothing intrudes, not sound, not thought, not self. If the world were to end during this moment, you would not know. If the world were to begin again, you would not know. Knowing is offline. And that is why this state is so deeply restorative. The brain is finally free from being a witness. Witnessing is work. Here, there is no witness, only process. And the process continues, quietly, precisely, efficiently. At some point, unmarked, unremembered, the brain will shift again. Imagery will begin to form. Dream logic will start to assemble itself from fragments. Narrative will return loosely at first, but before that happens, this space must be passed through completely. This is the buffer, the clearing, the night's deepest silence. You are not meant to stay aware here. You are meant to disappear into it, and you already have. If anything remains of awareness, it is so thin that it cannot hold on to this moment. It slips, and once it slips, it does not come back until something else has changed. The brain rests here, unobserved. No plan, no tomorrow, no continuity, just the quiet functioning of life without identity. And when the next movement finally begins, when the brain starts to build images again, when dreams quietly assemble themselves out of nothing, you will not remember this place. It will have done its work invisibly, as it always does, and the night will continue turning slowly, without needing you to follow it any further. When the brain has rested long enough in silence, something subtle begins to change. Not an awakening, not a return, more like a faint stirring beneath the surface of nothing. Up until now, there has been no experience to speak of, no images, no sensations, no awareness holding shape long enough to be remembered. The mind has been offline, and the body has been carrying itself through deep, automatic rhythms without supervision. This is not sleep yet in the way people usually imagine it. This is the pause before structure, and structure always returns slowly, imperfectly, without asking permission. The brain does not stay unformed forever. Rest is not an endpoint. It is a reset, and after a reset, systems begin to re-engage, not for action, not for planning, but for something much gentler: integration. You will not feel this happening. There is no sensation that marks the moment. If awareness appears at all, it does so faintly, like a ripple forming beneath still water. Not strong enough to break the surface, just enough to suggest movement somewhere below. The brain is beginning to allow content again, not thoughts, not memories, not meaning, just impressions, a vague sense of motion, a color without edges, a feeling of space without location. These are not dreams yet. Dreams require narrative. Narrative has not returned. What is returning is permissiveness. The brain is slowly reopening the channels it closed earlier, but without urgency, without direction. You might imagine it like a room where the lights are still off, but the doors have been unlocked. Air begins to move again. Temperature equalizes. Nothing happens, but the stillness changes quality. This is what integration feels like, if it could be felt. The nervous system is transitioning from pure maintenance to gentle synthesis. During the deepest silence, systems worked independently. Repair occurred, signals recalibrated, emotional residue dissipated. Now, those systems begin to communicate again, quietly, without language, without awareness. You're not re-entering the night. The night is reforming itself around you. This phase is fragile, not because it is weak, but because it is unfinished. The brain does not want to be observed here either. Observation would pull the process into focus too early. So awareness remains optional. It may flicker briefly, then fade again. If it does, it will feel vague, like trying to remember something without knowing what it is. That vagueness is intentional. Clarity is delayed. Clarity belongs to waking. This is still night. The body remains deeply still. Muscles stay slack. Breath remains slow and self-directed. Heart rhythm remains steady and unremarkable. Nothing in the body signals readiness. There is no preparation happening. Preparation is for the future. The future is still absent. Even now, what is happening is not a return to consciousness. It is a loosening of isolation. Earlier, systems were sealed off from one another to allow deep rest. Now those seals soften. Information begins to pass again, not in the form of thought, but in the form of coherence. The brain is checking that everything aligns, that energy levels are balanced, that emotional charge has settled, that the system can safely move forward when the time comes. This checking does not require awareness. It is purely automatic. You do not experience it, you benefit from it. This is why people wake feeling subtly different without knowing why. Something shifted here, but it was never meant to be known. You may feel a sense of presence returning now, not sharply, not clearly, more like the idea of presence, as if awareness is considering whether it needs to exist again. It doesn't decide yet. Decision requires intention. Intention has not returned, so awareness remains diffuse. If thoughts appear at all, they are not thoughts in the usual sense. They have no words, no direction, no continuity. They are more like internal weather, movement without message. This is the brain testing whether structure can re-emerge without causing disturbance. If the system remains calm, structure continues to assemble. If not, the brain retreats again into silence. Tonight, the system remains calm. There is nothing to disturb it. No tomorrow waiting, no plan pulling attention forward, no obligation forming in the background. So integration continues uninterrupted. The sense of time is still absent. Minutes and hours do not exist here. This phase could last seconds. It could last much longer. Duration has no meaning when nothing is being tracked. You are not approaching wakefulness. You are not approaching sleep either. You are passing through a corridor where neither applies, a corridor where the brain ensures that nothing from the day follows you deeper into the night. Anything unresolved that still carries charge is softened here. Not processed, not understood, neutralized. This is important. Understanding would reactivate identity. Identity would bring narrative. Narrative would bring time. Time would bring tomorrow. And tonight is not ready for that. So everything remains gentle. Impressions remain incomplete. Awareness remains optional. The brain maintains this balance effortlessly. This is why you may feel completely gone for long stretches, then briefly sense yourself again, then disappear once more. These are not awakenings, they are echoes. The brain is testing stability, not returning control. Eventually, when integration is complete, another shift will occur. Dreams will begin to form. Not vivid at first, not coherent, just fragments beginning to link. But that comes later. For now, the brain stays here, in this quiet middle state, where rest has already happened, and continuation has not yet begun. You do not need to follow this. Following would imply effort. Effort is unnecessary. The night is moving on its own, and as this gentle integration continues, without awareness, without memory, without identity, the brain prepares the ground for whatever comes next, without asking you to be present for it at all. At some point, the brain no longer distinguishes between letting go and simply being gone. Earlier in the night, there were stages, clear enough in hindsight: control loosening, thought thinning, awareness flickering, silence deepening. Each phase felt like movement, like a transition you could almost sense if you were paying attention. Now, even the idea of transition has dissolved. Nothing is changing anymore. Change implies direction. Direction implies comparison. Comparison implies awareness. And awareness is no longer doing that kind of work. The brain has entered a state where stability does not require maintenance, where balance holds itself without supervision, where nothing needs to be adjusted, corrected, or even noticed. This is not deep sleep in the dramatic sense people imagine. It is deeper than that. It is a state where the brain is no longer concerned with states at all. Earlier, the night unfolded like a descent, layers peeling away one by one. Here, there is no peeling. Nothing remains to be removed. What is left is a kind of still continuity, not continuity of experience, but continuity of function. Life continues quietly. Cells communicate, systems regulate, energy redistributes, but there is no experience of any of it. Experience requires a point of view. Point of view requires a center. The center is gone. This does not feel like emptiness. Emptiness would still be something. This feels like neutrality, so complete that it cannot be felt. The brain is no longer producing content, but it is also no longer suppressing it. Suppression implies effort. Effort is absent. Content simply does not arise because there is no condition for it to arise. Thoughts require problems. Images require imagination. Emotion requires narrative. None of these are active. The mind is not quiet, it is inactive. Inactivity here is not failure, it is success. The brain has reached a level of rest where it does not even need to signal that it is resting. Earlier, there were signs: slowness, softness, drifting. Those were cues the waking mind could recognize. Here, there are no cues. If awareness were to return briefly, and it sometimes does, it would find nothing to report. No sensation, no thought, no feeling, just a vague sense that something is continuing, somewhere, without detail. And then awareness would fade again. This is why this stage is almost never remembered. Memory requires events. Here, nothing qualifies as an event. There is no beginning, no middle, no end. Only ongoingness without markers. The brain prefers this. This is where it feels most unobserved. Observation changes behavior, even self-observation. Throughout the day, the brain is constantly reacting not only to the world, but to itself, checking performance, monitoring emotion, adjusting identity. That recursive loop is exhausting. Here, the loop is broken completely. The brain is not reflecting on itself. It is not aware of being unaware. It is simply functioning. This is the condition the brain evolved for long before consciousness became dominant. Consciousness is a relatively recent layer. Deep rest is older than language, older than identity, older than story. You may imagine this state as darkness, but darkness still has a quality. This has none. If you tried to describe it, you would fail, not because it is mysterious, but because description requires contrast. There is nothing to contrast against. This is baseline. The baseline the brain returns to when nothing pulls it away. You are not inside a dream. Dreams require a mind to witness images. There is no witness here. You're not inside sleep as you normally think of it either. Sleep is a word used by waking minds to describe what they are not doing. Here, the brain is not referencing waking at all. It is simply offline, not shut down, offline, disconnected from the need to generate experience. This disconnection is what allows the deepest recalibration. Neural circuits that were reinforced too strongly during the day loosen their grip. Connections that fired too often slow down. Patterns that became rigid soften back into flexibility. This does not feel like anything. Feeling would require awareness. Awareness would interfere. So, it is absent. This is why you cannot speed this stage up. Trying to sleep keeps awareness present. Trying to rest keeps awareness present. Here, awareness has already stepped aside. That is why the process is effective. The body, meanwhile, is fully surrendered, not limp, not tense, balanced. Muscle tone is at its natural minimum. Breath continues with no rhythm you could follow. The heart beats with no signal that draws attention. Hormones shift quietly. Temperature stabilizes. Immune processes adjust. All of this happens without sensation. The body does not announce its work. It simply does it. The brain trusts the body completely now. Earlier, there was still subtle supervision, checking, adjusting, monitoring. That has ended. This trust is not a decision. It is a state. The state where nothing has gone wrong for long enough that vigilance has no justification. Time does not exist here. If you were to try to estimate how long this lasts, you could not. Duration requires memory. Memory is offline. This stage could last seconds or hours. From inside it, there is no difference. Inside it, there is no inside. This is the paradox. There is no location, no orientation, no reference. Yet life continues perfectly. This is why the brain does not fear losing awareness. Awareness is not required for survival. It is required for action. Here, there is no action, so awareness is unnecessary. If awareness flickers briefly, just long enough for you to sense something, it will not stay. Staying would require something to attend to. There is nothing. So it fades again. This flickering is not a failure. It is the last echo of a system that no longer has a role, like a radio signal fading as you move out of range. Eventually, even the echo disappears. What remains is not darkness, not silence, not emptiness. What remains is the absence of disturbance. This is the brain's preferred condition. It does not seek stimulation, it seeks equilibrium. Equilibrium is quiet, not quiet as in muted, quiet as in undisturbed. Nothing presses, nothing pulls, nothing calls for response. This is why, later, when you wake, you may feel deeply rested without remembering anything at all. Rest happened where memory could not follow. You may feel that time passed instantly, or that you slept without dreaming. This is why. Dreaming has not started yet. Dreaming requires just enough awareness to witness images. That comes later. This stage is before dreaming, before experience, before you. And yet, it is not nothing. It is the foundation, the ground state, the condition that allows everything else to re-emerge cleanly. The brain does not linger here longer than it needs to. But while it is here, nothing intrudes. No sound reaches it meaningfully, no sensation registers, no identity forms. The world could rearrange itself, and it would not matter, because mattering requires awareness, and awareness is gone. This is not a void to be afraid of. Fear requires a subject. There is no subject. This is why the state feels neutral rather than frightening. Fear cannot exist without someone to feel it. Here, there is no one, only process, only balance, only the quiet continuation of life without commentary. At some unmarked point, unnoticed, unremembered, this stage will end, not with a signal, not with a sensation, just with a gradual reintroduction of structure. Dreams will begin to form somewhere beyond this. Narrative will slowly reassemble itself. Identity will return later still. But none of that concerns this moment. This moment is complete as it is. There is nothing to add, nothing to remove, nothing to witness. If awareness returns now, it will be faint and confused, with no memory of where it has been. And if it does not return, nothing is lost. The brain is doing exactly what it needs to do. Here, in this deep, unmarked stretch of the night, the future does not exist. The past does not exist. Even the present does not exist as an idea. There is only continuation without awareness, and that is enough. As this state holds, steady, neutral, unobserved, the brain completes its deepest recalibration. Nothing announces completion. There is no finish line. The night simply continues, and when the next movement eventually begins, when images start to form again, when dreams quietly assemble themselves out of nothing, you will not remember leaving this place, because there was never a place to leave. Only a moment when awareness was no longer required, and that moment has already passed. When awareness is no longer required, the night does not pause. It continues, quietly, indifferently, without needing to be witnessed. Up until now, the brain has been resting in a state so neutral that even neutrality itself has no texture, no contrast, no shape, just an ongoing absence of disturbance. And yet, even in this absence, something subtle begins to reorganize itself, not because it is directed to, not because there is a goal, but because life tends toward rhythm. Rhythm is older than thought. Before memory, before identity, before language, rhythm is what remains when nothing else is active. The brain, even in its deepest quiet, does not stop being rhythmic. Electrical patterns continue. Chemical cycles rise and fall. Internal timing loops turn slowly, without reference to clocks or awareness. These rhythms are not experienced. They are lived. Earlier in the night, the brain moved through phases of letting go, control, planning, anxiety, narrative, identity. Each release made room for deeper stillness. Now, in this stillness, the brain begins to prepare something new, not consciously, not intentionally. Preparation here does not point toward the future. It is more like rebalancing a scale after weight has been removed. When pressure disappears, systems settle into their natural positions. The brain does not remain unstructured forever. Unstructure is a reset, not a destination, and resets naturally lead to reformation. But this reformation is not yet meaning. It is pattern, very faint pattern. You may never feel it. If awareness returns briefly, it will not recognize what is happening. It will only sense a vague shift, an almost imperceptible movement beneath the surface of nothing, like the first current in still water. This is the beginning of internal coherence returning. Not coherence of thought, not coherence of story, coherence of rhythm. The brain begins to allow internal signals to align again, not to create awareness, but to prepare the ground for the next phase of sleep. This alignment is delicate. Too much structure too quickly would pull awareness back. Too little would leave the system inert. So the brain moves slowly, almost cautiously. You're not present for this. Presence would interfere. So awareness remains absent or fleeting. When it flickers, it finds no foothold. There is nothing to latch onto, nothing to interpret, nothing to follow. And so it fades again. The brain prefers it this way. This stage is not about resting anymore. Rest has already occurred. This stage is about continuity, about ensuring that when experience returns, later, much later, it does so without residue from before. Residue is what carries tension across nights, unfinished emotion, unresolved thought, unreleased vigilance. Those were softened earlier. Now they are gone. What remains is a clean internal field. Into this field, rhythm slowly re-enters. Not sound, not image, timing, internal timing. The brain's oscillations begin to sync, not sharply, not suddenly, gently. This synchronization is what allows the next layers of sleep to form naturally. Dreams will eventually emerge from this, but not yet. First, there must be enough coherence for imagery to assemble without collapsing. Imagery requires stability. Stability requires rhythm. Rhythm is returning now. This does not feel like anything. Feeling would require awareness. This happens beneath awareness. It is possible that awareness does not return at all during this entire phase. That is ideal. This phase does not benefit from being observed. The brain does not need feedback here. It is simply adjusting itself, like a system recalibrating after a long period of silence. If awareness does return briefly, it may experience something strange. Not thought, not sensation. A sense of almost something forming, almost something moving, almost something about to happen, but nothing completes. Completion would imply direction. Direction would imply purpose. Purpose is still absent. So the almost dissolves. and awareness fades again, the brain remains patient. It does not rush this. Rushing belongs to urgency. Urgency belongs to the future. The future is still not present, so the brain stays where it is. In this slow recohering, this quiet assembling of background structure, you may imagine this stage as the brain breathing internally, not literal breath, a deeper oscillation, expansion, and contraction of internal readiness, not readiness for action, readiness for continuity. Life does not stop when awareness stops. It flows differently. And now, that flow is beginning to organize itself into something that can eventually support experience again. But not yet. The mind is still absent. The self is still irrelevant. Identity is still dissolved. These things will return later, much later. For now, the brain keeps working without witness. If awareness were present, it might mistake this stage for emptiness. But emptiness is static. This is dynamic, dynamic in ways that cannot be felt, only inferred later. When you wake and feel subtly reset, you may notice in future mornings that you wake without remembering dreams, that you feel rested but cannot explain why. That time seemed to pass instantly. This stage is why. This is where nothing is remembered, where memory has nothing to attach to, where the night does its quietest work. The brain remains here until coherence reaches a threshold, not a sharp threshold, a sufficient one, enough rhythm to allow imagery, enough stability to support narrative fragments, enough safety to let awareness brush against content without waking fully. That threshold is approaching slowly, but it is not yet here, so the brain remains patient. Awareness remains optional, and the night continues, without markers, without story, without self. This is the deepest continuity of the night. Not the deepest sleep, the deepest absence of interruption. Interruption is what keeps the mind restless. Here, nothing interrupts. No sound matters, no sensation registers, no thought forms, no self appears. Only rhythm, only background alignment, only the slow preparation for something that will arrive later without announcement. You are not waiting for it. Waiting would require awareness. The brain is not waiting either. It is simply allowing rhythms to settle, allowing internal space to remain clear, allowing the night to move forward without resistance. At some point, unmarked, unnoticed, this coherence will be enough. And when it is, something new will form. Images will begin to assemble. Fragments will start to link. Dreams will quietly take shape. But before that happens, this stage must complete fully, without interference, without observation, without memory. And so the night stays here, doing nothing visible, doing everything necessary. As the slow rhythms continue to align, as coherence quietly strengthens beneath the surface, the brain remains unbothered by the absence of awareness. It does not miss it. It does not need it. Awareness is a tool, and tools are set aside when they are not required. The night knows what it is doing, and you do not need to be there to witness it. As this phase gently carries on, unhurried, unobserved, the brain completes its final preparations for the next mode of existence, one where experience will return, but without control, where images will appear without effort, where the self will remain soft and undefined, and where the night will continue to hold you quietly, as it always has. Eventually, something begins to appear where there was nothing, not clearly, not fully, not all at once. It does not arrive as a thought. Thought would require language, and language is still far away. It arrives first as a hint, a faint internal movement, a soft disturbance in the uniform quiet, a suggestion of form without edges. The brain is beginning to allow experience again, but without returning control. This is important. Earlier, awareness disappeared because it was unnecessary. Now, experience returns because the system is stable enough to support it without waking. This return is cautious. The brain has learned through the night that too much structure too quickly brings the future back with it, and the future is not welcome yet. So experience returns incomplete. You may never remember this stage. Most people don't. If awareness touches it at all, it does so lightly, like brushing the surface of water without breaking it. What appears first is not imagery in the usual sense. It is more like atmosphere, a feeling of movement without direction, a sense of space without geometry, a tone without emotion. These are not dreams. Dreams require narrative gravity. This has none. This is pre-dream material, the raw substance from which dreams will later be shaped. The brain is testing whether it can introduce content without reactivating identity. Identity is the risk. Identity pulls attention inward. Identity brings memory. Identity invites tomorrow. So identity remains suppressed. There is no you watching what is forming. There is just formation. The difference matters. When experience occurs without a witness, it does not create wakefulness. It creates flow. The brain prefers flow. Flow allows content to move through without sticking. Nothing here lingers. Nothing here asks to be interpreted. If awareness were present long enough, it might describe this stage as vague, strange, almost abstract. But awareness is not present long enough. It touches, then slips away, because there is nothing to hold it. The emerging content does not have edges. Edges create focus. Focus leads to engagement. Engagement leads to waking. So the brain avoids edges. Forms remain blurred. Movement remains slow. Transitions remain continuous. This is why early dream material feels fluid rather than cinematic. There are no cuts, no scenes, just shifting impressions. You may sense this as drifting through something rather than observing it. But even that is too much description. There is no observer, only motion. The brain is not trying to tell a story. Stories come later. Stories require causality. Causality requires time. Time is still only partially present. So what appears now is not about anything. It is simply happening. This is a safe way for experience to return. It does not require judgment. It does not require memory. It does not require response. The nervous system remains deeply calm. Breath stays slow. Heart rhythm remains steady. Muscle tone remains neutral. Nothing in the body signals readiness. This is crucial. The body must stay disengaged while the mind experiments with content. If the body were to tense, the brain would pull back, but the body remains surrendered. So content is allowed to continue. Gradually, very gradually, patterns begin to form, not meaning. Pattern, repetition without explanation. A shape appears, dissolves, reappears slightly altered. A sense of direction forms, then disappears. These patterns are the scaffolding of dreams. They allow the brain to test continuity without consequence. Continuity without consequence is the goal. During the day, continuity matters because actions have outcomes. At night, continuity can exist purely for its own sake. This is liberating for the brain. It allows creative recombination. Memories mix without logic. Sensations merge without source. Ideas float without ownership. This mixing is essential. It allows emotional material to be reprocessed without being relived. Without identity, memories do not hurt. They are just fragments, and fragments are harmless. The brain is very careful here. If a fragment carries too much charge, it is softened immediately, blurred, diluted. Nothing sharp is allowed through. Sharpness would trigger awareness, so everything remains gentle. If awareness returns briefly, it may sense something like almost dreaming. But before that recognition completes, it dissolves. The brain does not allow recognition to stabilize. Recognition is the doorway to self-awareness. Self-awareness is not needed yet, so recognition fades. The night continues. Content continues, but no one is there to witness it. This is the sweet spot. The place where experience exists without self, where imagery flows without interpretation, where the mind is active but not awake. Most people think dreams are the opposite of waking. They are not. Dreams are the opposite of control. Control is absent here, so dreams can begin. Not fully formed dreams, not stories, but the first conditions that make stories possible. You may sense now, if awareness brushes this state, that something is happening again, that the nothingness has texture, that the night is no longer blank. This is true, but texture does not equal tension. The system remains deeply relaxed. There is no urgency. Nothing needs to be followed. Nothing needs to be remembered. This is why, later, you may wake with the sense that you dreamed without knowing what you dreamed. The dreaming began here, but memory did not. Memory will come later, when identity returns. For now, identity stays away. The brain is content to let images pass through without leaving traces. This is how it protects rest. You're not meant to hold on to this stage. You are meant to pass through it, and you already are. As the patterns continue to coalesce, they grow slightly more stable, still fluid, still soft, but less chaotic. The brain is finding a rhythm in content itself, not just internal timing, but experiential timing. This is the final preparation. Once experiential rhythm stabilizes, dreams can deepen, narrative can begin to assemble loosely, but that is still ahead. For now, the brain stays in this intermediate zone, where experience exists but does not matter, where imagery forms but does not insist, where awareness is unnecessary and discouraged. The future is still absent. Tomorrow has not returned. And because tomorrow has not returned, nothing here becomes important. Importance is what wakes you. Nothing is important. So the night remains intact. The brain allows this gentle emergence to continue, not watching it, not guiding it, simply allowing it to happen. And as this allowance continues, as patterns repeat just enough to create continuity without identity, the system prepares for the final phase of the night's journey, a phase where dreams become deep enough to carry you without waking you, where experience returns fully, but without control, where the self remains dissolved, and where the night completes its cycle without ever asking you to participate. That movement is already forming, quietly, without signal, and as it does, there is no need to follow it. Because following would imply awareness, and awareness is still optional, so the night continues on its own, carrying experience forward without ownership, letting images drift without meaning, preparing the mind for the final, gentle descent that comes before morning, without bringing morning any closer at all. There is no clear moment when the night completes itself, no signal, no boundary, no quiet announcement that something has ended and something else has begun. The night does not work in endings. It works in thinning. Earlier, experience returned softly, without ownership, without narrative, without a self to gather it. Images drifted, patterns assembled just enough to exist, not enough to matter. Awareness brushed against them and slipped away again. Now, even that gentleness begins to loosen, not by stopping, by spreading. Experience no longer gathers itself into impressions. Impressions no longer gather themselves into patterns. Patterns no longer seek continuity. Everything that briefly formed begins to dissolve back into a wider field. This is not a collapse, it is diffusion. Diffusion is how the night finishes its work. During the day, the brain concentrates, it narrows, it focuses, it compresses experience into useful shapes. During the night, especially at its deepest point, the brain does the opposite, it disperses. Whatever remained, residual structure, faint imagery, the beginnings of dreams, now thins out again, not because it failed, but because it is no longer needed. The brain has gathered what it needed. It has recalibrated. It has neutralized. It has aligned rhythm with rhythm. There is nothing left to hold together, so nothing remains held. If awareness were to return now, and it rarely does, it would find no stable experience to attach itself to. No images, no flow, no texture, only a vast quiet that does not feel empty, because there is no one left to feel it. This is the final condition of the night, not sleep as an event, not dreaming as a story, but rest as a state so complete that nothing distinguishes it from non-experience. The brain has finished rearranging itself. There is no sense of completion because completion requires recognition. Recognition requires awareness. Awareness is still absent, and that absence is intentional. The brain does not want a witness at this point. Witnesses create memory. Memory creates continuity. Continuity creates identity. Identity brings the future with it. The future is not welcome yet, so the night remains wide, open, unmarked. The body is entirely surrendered now, not heavy, not light, balanced. Breath continues somewhere far beneath any sense of breathing. Heartbeat continues somewhere beyond any sense of pulse. Muscles maintain only the minimum tone required to exist. Nothing is prepared, nothing is defended, nothing is expected. Expectation is the last thread to be cut. Earlier in the night, expectation dissolved gradually. First expectation of tasks, then expectation of outcomes, then expectation of awareness itself. Now, even the expectation that something might happen is gone. Nothing is anticipated. This is why the night feels endless from within it, not long. Endless. Endlessness does not mean infinite time. It means the absence of direction. Without direction, time does not move forward. It does not move backward either. It simply does not apply. The brain rests best when time is irrelevant. You are not waiting for morning. Morning does not exist here. You are not moving toward waking. Waking does not exist here. Those ideas belong to another state, another layer, another self. Here, there is only continuation without reference. This is why the night can feel as if it passes instantly when you wake. From this depth, there is no memory bridge. Nothing connects this state to what comes later. It ends without ending. When it eventually releases you, much later, you will not feel as though you left something behind. There is nothing to leave, no place, no state, no experience. just a quiet gap where restoration occurred. The brain values these gaps. They are where it sheds weight, not physical weight, mental weight, the weight of vigilance, the weight of interpretation, the weight of needing to be someone. Here, no one is needed. So the weight is set down. This is why people sometimes wake with a subtle sense of relief without knowing why. Nothing happened, and that was exactly what was needed. If awareness were to return for a final time, briefly, faintly, it might sense something like vastness, not space, not darkness, vastness without dimensions, but even that impression would dissolve before it could be named. Naming would pull the mind back. The brain does not want to be pulled back yet, so the night remains intact, complete in its incompleteness, finished by dispersing everything that once had form. This is the point where nothing more can be described, not because something dramatic has occurred, but because nothing remains that can be pointed to. Language dissolves here, concepts dissolve here, even the idea of dissolving dissolves. The brain is no longer transitioning. It is simply resting in its most neutral condition, and neutrality does not announce itself. It does not shimmer. It does not feel profound. It feels like nothing at all, which is why it works. When morning eventually arrives, and it will quietly without asking, awareness will return in layers. First sensation, then orientation, then identity, then time. You will not remember this place. There will be no echo of it, no impression, no trace. That is its function, to do its work invisibly, to hold you without being known, to restore without being remembered. Until then, the night does not end. It does not move. It does not speak. It simply remains, wide enough to contain nothing, quiet enough to require no awareness, and gentle enough to let even the idea of a self fade completely, leaving only the continuation of life without observation, until observation is needed again, much later, when the world returns on its own.